He threw her out, and her squaw found her the same night.
After discovering part of the truth by severance, back out. She ended up in a hostel with thin walls and no protection. Her phone buzzed. Adrian knew she was gone. Had turned away from her. And now he was ready to finish what he started.
Let's pause hands right here at precisely 47 p.m. and truly take in this scene unfolding in the sterile, unforgiving kitchen of Manhattan's most feared crime lord. Look at the young woman by the sink. Her delicate frame trembles with a quiet terror, completely unaware that the man who will soon reshape her entire world has just emerged from the shadows behind her. There is such profound, bitter irony in this moment. The man entering this room embodies the very definition of a sociopath, a cold, calculating force of nature. Yet, in a truly twisted stroke of destiny, this same individual, this absolute monster, is about to become her unexpected, formidable shield against utter destruction. It teaches us that sometimes, in the most dire circumstances, the only thing powerful enough to protect you from one kind of danger is a different, even more formidable one. Stay with me as we witness these two broken souls transform a luxurious high-rise into an intensely personal battleground. Focus your attention on Sarapina. The air is thick with citrus cleaner, but beneath that sharp chemical bite, you can almost sense her raw terror. Her hands are cracked and red, desperately scrubbing a stain that vanished half an hour ago. Why keep going? Because this frantic motion keeps the past at bay. The second she stops, the dead silence of the penthouse will rush in, bringing the dark memories she is trying to outrun. She has been shaped by pure psychological torment to shrink into nothingness. It reveals a tragic truth about the human mind, that when trauma locks your nervous system in survival mode, peace stops feeling like safety. A quiet room simply feels like a loaded weapon, teaching us that the hardest wars are fought long after the physical danger has passed. Step into this space with me and look at the stark contrast unfolding. The rest of Kyle Duval's staff left over 2 hours ago, but Sarafina stays behind. She hides in the grueling overtime, dodging the crowded subway to ensure the man who broke her cannot find her. Notice the brutal design of this high-rise kitchen. It is an altar of absolute control. Sheer glass walls let Duval look down on the city like a distant king, matched with freezing Italian marble, lacking a single soft edge. Yet, inside this sterile icebox built by a dangerous man, Sarafina finally breathes easy. It teaches us a strange but profound truth. Sometimes, the environments that appear the coldest to others are exactly where we find the foundation to rebuild our peace. For half a year, she has carved out an existence inside a very dark shadow. She only crosses paths with Duval during the dead of night, right as he returns from a violent underworld. He wears his reputation like heavy iron armor. Just breathing his name on the wrong street could bed to the end for anyone. Yet, in all these quiet midnight encounters, this fearsome man has never shown her a single drop of malice. She knowingly walked into the territory of an apex predator just to escape a cowardly, unpredictable hunter. There is a quiet tragedy in that kind of survival logic, but it reveals a raw lesson about human nature. When someone has been hunted for long enough, they will gladly seek shelter in the den of a lion just to make sure the street dogs cannot reach them anymore. You and I are watching a fractured spirit try to balance an impossible equation. She firmly believed that standing in the shadow of a monster would make her completely invisible. Watch her as she lets the scalding water run over her hands. For one brief moment, She drifts away, dreaming of a life where she no longer has to run. But then, a soft click shatters the quiet, the heavy latch of a door shutting. Her body instantly turns against her, locking into rigid stone as her breath catches in her throat. In her former life, the simple sound of a closed door was always the opening note to an evening of pain. It is a sobering lesson we all must carry. Our bodies hold tightly to the chapters of our lives that our minds are desperately trying to rip out of the book. Notice the terrible stillness that takes over her frame. Her mind begins running the brutal mathematics of trauma, calculating the steps to the door while knowing that running only triggers a chase. Then a steady voice cuts through the chill of the room. It carries no anger, just quiet certainty, asking who put those marks on her. It is only Duval. We see her ingrained survival training take over as she turns with agonizing slowness, keeping her hands completely visible. She is terrified of sparking his rage, failing to realize that men of his caliber do not throw tantrums. They simply remove obstacles. The lesson here is stark. When you spend years bracing for a violent storm, you often lose the ability to recognize the quiet calm of someone who actually holds true power. Duval holds his ground in the doorway, commanding the room with the terrifying stillness of a creature at the top of the food chain. His tailored suit is far more than fabric. It is a finely crafted weapon of authority. Notice how he holds his heavy glass without taking a sip, choosing instead to study every tiny tremor in her posture. Sarafina instantly folds inward, dropping her eyes like a cornered animal while stammering a hollow apology about finishing her chores later. He entirely ignores her frantic scrambling. Instead, he issues one flat, quiet command for her to answer him. It brings us to a compelling realization about influence. True power never actually needs to shout. It speaks softly, fully expecting the rest of the world to immediately stop and listen. For years, she relied on a shield of weak excuses and soft apologies to survive the explosive anger of broken men. But under the clinical, unwavering weight of Duval's stare, those old survival tricks instantly turn to ash. You simply cannot bluff a man who lives entirely in the dark. Still, she tries, whispering to the floor that she has no idea what he means. In response, he slowly lowers his glass to the marble. The faint sound makes her entire body jerk in raw terror, followed immediately by a heavy wave of shame. She hates how openly her fear paints itself across her face. He absorbs every detail, stepping forward with deliberate, gentle slowness. It teaches us a hard truth. We can never truly heal our deepest wounds as long as we keep trying to hide them behind fragile lies. I want you to look closely at this next movement because his approach here is a masterclass in psychology. Instead of looming over her trembling shoulders to assert his dominance, he chooses the exact opposite path. He pulls out a heavy wooden chair and sits, bringing his eyes perfectly level with hers. By completely removing that vertical power dynamic, he gracefully short-circuits her panicked nervous system. As he begins listing the grim evidence of her trauma, the bruises, the flinching, the frantic cleaning, his expression remains a blank wall. He dismantles her fake reality with the absolute precision of a surgeon. It leaves us with a profound lesson. If you ever want to truly reach someone who is deeply broken, you must first be willing to sit down and meet them at their level. Quickly tucks her trembling hands out of sight, desperately clinging to the illusion that her armor is still intact. She whispers that everything is completely fine, but he crushes the lie without hesitation. He simply repeats the same quiet question, demanding to know who marked her. That steady repetition strikes her fragile mind like a heavy hammer. turning the fortress of lies she built over 6 months into dust. The chilling truth is that he is not offering a shoulder to cry on. He is establishing absolute dominance. He already holds the answer, but he requires her to say the words out loud. As hot tears finally break through her defenses, it forces us to accept a difficult reality. Exposing our purest vulnerability is often far more terrifying than enduring any physical pain. Notice how masterfully he wields the silence like a blade. He offers no warm glance and no hollow words to cushion her suffering. He simply sits in the quiet, letting the internal pressure mount until her resolve shatters. For someone who only knows loud, chaotic violence, this absolute stillness is an exquisite form of torture. Finally, she crumbles, whispering the name of the man who hurt her for 2 years. Watch the dark shadow pass over Duval's face. It is the chilling reaction of a predator realizing another hunter has been trespassing on his ground. He notes her use of the past tense with a cold finality. It proves a powerful lesson about our minds. True silence does not just create empty space. It forcefully drags our darkest, most painful truths out into the blinding light. We are going to unpack this heartbreaking moment together. Duval informs her that the man is still hunting her, presenting the fact not as a question, but as a grim guarantee. Her former abuser was a master of manipulation, hiding deep cruelty behind a charming face. Yet, listen to her tragic defense. She argues that he never used his fists, somehow believing that a lack of physical bruises erases her status as a victim. It is a gut-wrenching portrait of a captured mind. In response, Duval's stoic armor reveals a tiny fracture. His jaw tightens before he leans in and asks how long it took her to actually believe that lie. Her hollow, broken laugh is devastating. It teaches us a vital lesson. The deepest wounds we carry are rarely the ones that leave visible marks on our skin. Let's pause the frame right here, because this exact moment reveals everything. The room drops into a suffocating quiet, interrupted only by the faint hum of a refrigerator. Duval rises from his chair, like a machine, no wasted movement, just the cold projection of pure dominance. He finishes his drink, effectively resetting the chessboard. He looks down and states she is safe here, but do not mistake this for comfort. He is planting a flag and claiming territory. Sarafina is too fractured to see it, haunted by her ex, whispering that Adrian never makes a single mistake. Duval just delivers the most arrogant line imaginable. Neither do I. He never even blinks. It reminds us of a bitter truth. Sometimes, to survive the wolf hunting you in the dark, you must willingly step inside the cage with a lion. I have watched this tragic dynamic unfold 100 times on screen, but it never loses its sting. Kyle steps closer, yet notice how the camera holds him right at the edge of her panic zone. He treats her exactly like a startled, trembling deer. He stares down with dead, pale eyes and simply tells her she works for him now. Nobody touches what belongs to his house. He is not playing the noble hero. He is methodically cataloging a brand new piece of property. But the heartbreaking part is that Sarafina actually feels a genuine flicker of hope. This is the precise second a twisted attachment takes root in her psyche. She asks what happens if Adrian finds her, and Kyle offers a perfectly lethal smile. When the devil is actively hunting you down, you rarely ask the demon who offers shelter for his moral credentials. Kyle casually mentions that her ex will soon regret ever breathing in her direction. The director then pulls us into a haunting 3-day montage. Sarafina obsessively scrubs rooms that are already spotless, while the household staff drift around her like silent ghosts. But pay close attention to the shadows in the frame. The entire environment is quietly shifting. Security codes swap out in the dead of night. The doorman suddenly checks identification like a strict border guard. Security cameras slowly tilt, wiping out every single blind spot. Nobody says a word to her, but when you have lived your entire life in terror, you can feel the cage shrinking. Real power never needs to scream its name in your face. It simply locks all the exits. On the fourth night, she hears low voices leaking from his private study. The heavy oak door is cracked just an inch, casting a sharp slice of light across her pale face. She hears Kyle speaking, his tone dripping with unquestionable authority, while a nervous subordinate delivers a report on Adrian. The man is 37, an Ivy League graduate, worth $200 million, and lacks even a single parking ticket. Kyle shuts that angle down instantly, ordering his man to dig much deeper. When the subordinate foolishly questions what they are even looking for, Kyle delivers a bone-chilling reply. They are looking for everything Adrian buried. You and I should examine this closely, because absolute perfection is always the ultimate red flag. When someone presents a flawless surface with zero visible mistakes, they are almost certainly hiding entire graveyards of skeletons in their closet. Serafina stands completely frozen in the dim hallway. Every primal instinct screams at her to run, but the crushing weight of her past trauma glues her shoes to the floorboards. Inside the room, the investigator warns that digging that deep will take weeks. Kyle slices right through the weak excuse, giving him exactly 72 hours to deliver. As heavy footsteps pivot toward the door, her brain finally snaps into gear. She grabs a stack of folded towels and hurries away, her chest heaving. Just think about the twisted tragedy of her situation. She feels profound, desperate relief that someone is finally hunting Adrian, yet harbors absolute terror knowing what Kyle is truly capable of. It reveals a harsh truth we all must face. Knowledge is a loaded gun, but it remains utterly useless if you are too terrified to pull the trigger. She stares blankly before retreating to her cold, sterile bedroom. The camera deliberately lingers on her reading until 4 a.m, and the realization is brutally sad. Every page acts as a terrible mirror, reflecting exactly how she was dismantled piece by piece. The forced isolation, the relentless stalking, the calculated mind games designed to make her feel completely insane. Adrian took his deep psychological sickness, wrapped it in a pretty bow, and called it romance. When exhaustion finally takes her, she dreams of endless dark hallways and his voice swearing she will never escape. No matter how fast you run, your demons always catch a ride in your own mind. 2 weeks later, her phone suddenly buzzes. Unknown caller. A single text drops. I know where you are. In 1 second, her fragile fantasy of safety shatters completely. Watch her pale face in this lingering, close-up shot. Her entire reality breaks apart in real time. The edges of the room bleed into a suffocating darkness. Her trembling hands go entirely numb, and the phone clatters loudly against the hard tiles. 6 brutal months of hiding in the shadows, of playing dead, of building this delicate little bubble of safety, all wiped out by 5 simple words. A typical survivor would just pack a small bag, change her name again, and vanish into the cold wind, but look deep into her exhausted eyes. She is sick of running from the toxic shadow that keeps destroying her life. Stick with me, because this is the true turning point of our tragic story. Sometimes, having your back slammed violently against a brick wall is the only thing that finally teaches you how to throw a punch. The guard working the front desk is Marcus, a hardened former military man who can spot raw fear from a mile away. He takes one look at her ghost white face and knows immediately that her walls have fallen. She asks for Duval, and miraculously, her voice does not even shake. Marcus sees the sheer, desperate panic hiding in her eyes, throws the strict building protocol out the window, and radios his boss. Kyle does not miss a single beat. Send her up. Now, consider the stark, cinematic lighting of Kyle's office for a second. It consumes the whole corner of the penthouse, radiating pure, suffocating intimidation. Massive glass windows, absolutely zero clutter, and a dark wooden desk resembling a sacrificial altar. Your living space always reveals the unvarnished truth of your soul. And this room demands absolute, unbroken control. She steps into the cavernous room, where Kyle is staring out the glass, barking ruthless corporate orders into his phone like a dictator. He commands someone to ignore the board and just get the deal done tonight. He hangs up and slowly turns around. The precise second he registers the absolute ruin in her face, the entire atmosphere of the room shifts. He does not rush over to offer warm comfort. He demands to know what happened, analyzing her like a cold detective pulling facts from a bleeding witness. Serafina trembles as she hands him the phone. Kyle reads the glowing screen and his posture turns to literal stone. The scariest thing a truly dangerous man can do is absolutely nothing. His silence is that heavy, dead quiet you feel right before a tornado rips the roof off your house. Total destruction is no longer a threat, it is imminent. When he finally breaks the heavy silence, his voice is unnervingly soft. He treats her with the delicate precision of handling an active bomb. He calmly extracts the cold facts. The message arrived 5 minutes ago, and she did not reply. He sets the device down like a piece of contaminated evidence and softly instructs her to sit. Then, he does something beautifully unexpected. Instead of hiding behind the power of his massive desk, he grabs a glass of water and sits directly in front of her. He looks right into her tear-filled eyes and tells her she did the right thing. She tries to blame herself, but he sharply cuts her off. You did the right thing. We often forget that real healing begins the exact second another human being finally takes your side. She buries her face in her trembling hands, fighting a losing battle against her tears. She chokes out a desperate apology for bringing this chaos to his front door. Kyle simply stares right through her and coldly states she is not a liability. He declares she is part of his house now, and he always protects his property. Any normal person would hear that dark claim of ownership and immediately run for the hills. It is the exact same toxic language her abuser once used. But her damaged psyche is unknowingly trading one fierce master for another. Kyle's twisted possessiveness sneaks right past her mental defenses because he wields it as a heavy shield to keep her alive, rather than a chain to bind her. She looks up and quietly asks what they do now. Kyle rises, stepping effortlessly back into his ruthless kingpin persona. The absolute best way to kill paralyzing fear is to finally take concrete action. The quiet war has just begun. For a fleeting, almost imperceptible second, the camera catches a genuine spark of human empathy beneath his freezing exterior. He calmly explains that Adrian threatened her on his personal turf, which means it is officially his problem now. She points out that he does not owe her a single thing, and he simply replies, I know. You can feel the heavy, tragic weight anchored to those two softly spoken words. A rational man would fire her on the spot, wipe his hands clean, and protect his empire. But here is something you and I are going to unpack together. The most fiercely dangerous loyalty in this world is the kind freely chosen, not violently forced. He dials his underworld fixer, his voice shifting right back into pure predator mode. He orders a total background sweep. He is about to strip Adrian's digital life to nag the absolute bone and utterly ruin him. Let us pause the film right here and examine this together. This is the exact frame where the thriller fades and a true Greek tragedy takes the stage. Kyle tells his contact the cost means nothing, demanding the job done in 48 hours. He dictates lockdown rules with the cold authority of a warden. As Sarafina reaches the door, she turns and asks why he is doing this. His face remains stone, but his eyes betray an ancient fracture of sorrow. "Nobody did it for me," he answers softly. This reveals a brutal reality about trauma. We often spend our adult lives building power to rescue the helpless kid we used to be. The lesson here is profound. True healing never comes from building impenetrable walls, but from extending the very hand you once desperately needed yourself. Midnight is the agonizing hour when a traumatized mind clocks in for its heaviest shift. Sarafina lies perfectly rigid, staring into the dark. Her thoughts endlessly scroll through tragic endings. Terrified Adrian is coming to rip her fragile new life to shreds. Defeated by 2:13 in the morning, she wanders into the cavernous penthouse, bathed in the artificial glow of city lights. Reaching the kitchen, she freezes. Kale is already there. Gone are the expensive suits and layers of impenetrable armor. He is just a man in gray sweatpants and a dark shirt. It is deeply unsettling to watch an apex predator simply existing in the quiet of the night. The harsh lesson we must learn is this: the most dangerous figures in our lives rarely look like monsters when they are resting. Step into this scene with me and observe the framing. Kale sits bathed in the harsh glare of his laptop, looking as though he has not slept a full night in decades. He is a man obsessed, but watch closely what he refrains from doing. He never demands to know why she haunts the halls. He simply shuts his screen and nods toward an empty stool. Without a syllable, he prepares her coffee with cream and exactly 1 sugar. He has been paying close attention. When he asks if sleep evades her, she gives a heavy nod. They sit together in the dark, watching the city breathe below. Two shattered souls find comfort in their shared inability to dream. The takeaway here is profound. Sometimes the absolute greatest gift you can offer a broken heart is simply sitting beside them and sharing the silence. The camera lingers on Sarafina as she asks the question hanging in the cold air. Why does a powerful man isolate himself in this steel fortress? For a fleeting second, the wall behind his eyes cracks. Kale speaks of a youth trapped in spaces where people weaponized closeness to inflict wounds. He vowed to use future power to purchase sheer distance. Having just escaped a monster, she knows the exact weight of those invisible scars. She asks how old he was when he fled. 17, he whispers. Where did he go? Anywhere else, he replies into the shadows. This is the bleeding tragedy of survival. The truth we take from this is devastating but necessary to understand. When you run from the people who are supposed to love you, the destination never matters, only the sheer distance. Notice the slight shift in her posture. She understands the desperate need for reinvention. You must burn your old self to ash to stay alive. She asks if he ever returns to that past, and he shoots the thought down. When asked if he misses it, his eyes reveal a tiny fracture. You do not miss a prison, he states with finality. You simply digest the reality that you survived it. It is a fragile moment of trust until the real world shatters it. Kale drops a devastating revelation. Her psychopathic ex is weaponizing his network to track everyone who dared leave him. Absolute dread sinks into her trembling bones. This teaches a stark reality we cannot ignore. The toxic ghosts of our past do not merely haunt our memories. If we refuse to confront them, they will eventually hunt us down. Her voice trembles as she asks how many others there are. Kale does not soften the blow. At least 7, he says. This is the sickening truth about narcissists like Adrian. They rarely throw a physical punch. Instead, they orchestrate a suffocating ballet of control, twisting reality until your own mind becomes foreign territory. Serafina shuts her eyes, feeling the weight of that invisible cage. When she asks Kale for his next move, the warmth drains from the room. He is going to end it. Panic grips her. She warns that Adrian is merely testing the perimeter. But Kale does not flinch, preparing a lethal strike. She grips the stone counter to steady her shaking hands. The life lesson here is terrifying but vital. True monsters never hide in the dark. They operate in broad daylight, shielded by charming smiles. She warns him that Adrian commands legal empires designed solely to bury enemies. Kale leans into the faint light with terrifying confidence. He softly replies that he wields the exact same destructive power. Half of her soul is paralyzed by terror, yet the other half tastes salvation. Her trauma screams at her to push Kale away, shielding him from the blast radius of her past. But she remains silent. The cinematic irony is heavy. For the first time, an apex predator stands between her and the architect of her suffering. Her profound exhaustion finally overpowers her fear. When she asks for her role, Kale commands her to simply stay safe. We must all learn this difficult life lesson. Sometimes, the bravest act of defiance is stepping back and letting someone else hold the heavy shield. He orders her to let go of the steering wheel of her life. Naturally, her guarded independence flares up. But Kale lowers his tone, bypassing her emotional armor. He points out that surviving in isolation has hollowed her out, and it is time to surrender the heavy lifting. Tears break instantly, a flood of exhausted panic spilling down her cheeks. She confesses she no longer knows how to depend on another human soul. He simply whispers for her to learn. As dawn washes over the city, her chronic terror softens into fragile trust. But peace carries a rapid expiration date. 1 week later, the illusion shatters when Marcus breaches the room with grim urgency. This offers a sobering life lesson. The moments we finally lower our guard and feel safe are often just the quiet breath before a devastating storm. Stick with me here, because the dynamic shifts. Marcus announces Kale needs her in the vault immediately. Her stomach visibly plummets. She begs for context, receiving only silence. Her heart hammers as they enter a room pulsating with camera feeds. Kale stands rigid, locked onto the monitor like a lion spotting blood. He orders her to watch. The footage rewinds 40 minutes to a lobby. A man glides into the frame, carrying a massive arrangement of white peonies. Serafina's lungs completely seize. Those blossoms were the exact torture device her ex used to shatter her sanity. Here is the difficult truth we must all accept. The most terrifying weapons are rarely forged from steel. Sometimes, the deepest psychological wounds are delivered, wrapped in a perfectly disguised romantic gesture. Every time Adrian shattered her reality, he presented pristine white flowers as a twisted apology. On the grainy screen, this sociopath struts through the lobby wearing the charming mask society applauds. He is denied entry, yet that perfect plastic smile never wavers. He deposits the bouquet and strolls into the daylight. The nightmare consumes less than 90 seconds. The footage freezes. Kale turns his head. His features arc from carved marble, yet his pale eyes radiate lethal intent. He coldly asks if she expected her abuser to breach their sanctuary. She offers a trembling shake of her head. The bitter truth about toxic people leaves us with a vital life lesson. Manipulative abusers never truly let you go. They merely retreat into the shadows, calculating exactly how long it takes for you to flinch upon their return. Cale sharply asks if Adrian penetrated their defenses elsewhere. She swears he has not. Instantly, Cale shifts into a wartime general, commanding Marcus to hijack street cameras and dissect traffic grids. In the center of this storm, Sarafina remains frozen, trapped in a suffocating flashback. This is the dark illusion of a sociopath. They construct a flawless public facade, deliberately making their victim appear insane. Nausea forces her to grip the console. Cale slices through the silence, stating the terrifying obvious. The man is escalating. She gasps for air, asking what happens next. Cale locks eyes with her and confirms the shift. The era of playing defense has ended. The bleak life lesson here is absolute and unforgiving. You cannot negotiate with a relentless predator. To survive, you must evolve into the greater threat. Cale dissects the sickening psychology at play. Adrian showing his face is a calculated move to prove he still owns her soul, the classic playbook of an abuser, weaponizing terror. Her knuckles drain of color as she demands a strike back. Cale does not blink. He slides a heavy dossier across the desk, stating the cycle dies today. Her hands shake as she opens it, finding the forensic ruin of Adrian's pristine mask. Hidden accounts, buried testimonies of 4 women he broke. Seeing her trauma validated in black ink makes her tremble. She asks how Cale unearthed these ghosts. He replies that his people dig up what monsters try to hide. The lesson here is undeniable. No matter how deep someone buries their worst sins, the dirt always washes away, dragging the truth back into the light. Let us walk through this sequence together. Picture the cold cinematography. Sarafina stands by the glowing monitors, realizing she finally holds the ammunition to detonate her abuser's false reality. Cale undergoes a striking transformation. His face goes dead, shifting from quiet protector to cold executioner in one breath. He whispers that he is going out for a conversation. He steps into the night in a flawless black suit. Unarmed, he moves with the terrifying grace of a grim reaper, sliding into a dark sedan that hunts through the neon streets. Marcus remains behind as a silent guard. The takeaway here is something we often overlook. Sometimes life sends you the exact monster you need to hunt your own demons down. Real safety rarely comes in a soft package. Marcus stands like cold granite, refusing to offer a single detail about Cale. The low light feels heavy, pressing down on Sarafina as her grip tightens on the dark desk. Every primal instinct screams at her to run before the blast radius of violence catches her. But the tragic weight of her exhaustion anchors her. She has lived inside chronic terror for far too long to keep running. What if he fails? She whispers. Marcus lets a dark, knowing smirk touch his mouth. He murmurs that Cale consumes men like Adrian just to pass the time. The lesson here is born from pure survival. Prolonged fear drains your spirit so completely that, eventually, you have no choice but to place your fragile trust in the darkest predator, willing to fight on your side. Marcus, projecting cold confidence, does nothing to quiet the violent drumming of Sarafina's heart. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? She knows exactly how Adrian strikes back when his ego takes a hit. His goal is total psychological destruction. She stays paralyzed in front of the monitors, suffocating in dark scenarios. Cut to Cale approaching a nameless building of tinted glass. The heavy steel door yields instantly, crowning him the king of this sunless empire. Inside, the air hangs heavy with amber shadows and the sharp scent of expensive cigars. It forces a chilling realization upon us. The most dangerous arenas on earth rarely look like chaotic battlegrounds. True evil prefers to hide in plain sight, quietly breathing and waiting in absolute luxury. The upstairs chamber is engineered purely to crush the spirit. The dark room radiates a silent threat that guarantees no one will ever hear you bleed. A shadow in the corner gives a faint nod, confirming the target is alone. Cale ignores the suffocating silence, gliding up the narrow stairs like a ghost with a violent purpose. Observe the sheer geometry of this trap. 1 table, 2 chairs, 0 exits. Adrian sits draped in pristine white, flashing that hollow smile he uses to charm the elite. As Cale enters, Adrian rises, extending a hand in a pathetic display of gentlemanly grace. It is a grotesque masquerade. The quiet truth to remember is simple. The most venomous souls will always try to blind you with an illusion of politeness right before they strike. Adrian forces a thick veneer of warmth. Cale lets the outstretched hand wither in the air, sitting down with terrifying stillness. A heavy folder lands on the table with a fatal thud. Adrian keeps his plastic smile stitched in place, but his eyes snap to the dossier. The first tremor of panic ripples across his jaw. He probes, asking how Cale could possibly know Serafina. Cale offers a dead stare, flatly denying any connection. Adrian feigns innocent confusion, leaning forward. Cale states that Adrian crossed a sacred boundary by claiming ownership over someone who is not his. The tragedy of arrogance is universal. People who treat human lives as disposable objects will inevitably summon a predator who plays their cruel game with lethal precision. You and I have seen this exact moment before. It is the suffocating instant a predator realizes the cage door has locked behind them. The temperature drops. Adrian lies smoothly, claiming he merely delivered innocent flowers to an old friend. Cale refuses the fiction, calling it a calculated strike to terrorize a broken woman. Adrian forces a hollow laugh, insisting Serafina needs no protector. Cale leans closer, the dim light catching his dead eyes, and orders him to open the file. Adrian hesitates, his knuckles draining of blood as he peels back the cover. This is the bitter poetry of the tormentor. They revel in false power until someone forces them to look. The unforgiving truth is that every tyrant eventually hits a solid wall of stone that finally shatters their fragile illusion. Adrian asks what he is looking at. Beneath his fingertips lies the absolute ruin of his existence. Ledgers expose a shadow fund used to bankroll his obsessive surveillance. Emails prove he weaponized private investigators to stalk 7 women. Sworn testimonies detail his methodical psychological torture. Adrian closes the flap, trying to mask his dread with bored disdain, but murder burns in his eyes. He dismisses the documents as forgery, sneering that anyone can bribe a witness. Cale reclines into the shadows, perfectly relaxed. He agrees that forgery is possible, but entirely unnecessary here. Adrian clenches his jaw so hard it might crack. It is a terrifying awakening. The darkest deeds always leave a mark, and all the wealth in the world can never truly erase the paper trail of a vicious past. Let us unpack this shift in power together. Adrian demands to know what Cale wants. Cale drops his voice to a chilling register, commanding that Serafina is off limits. No digital traces, no flowers, no watches. Adrian must erase hers from his memory. Adrian scoffs, a desperate flex of his bruised ego, asking what happens if he refuses. Cale offers zero reaction. The silence that follows is dense enough to shatter glass. Adrian barks a hollow laugh, threatening to obliterate Cale's enterprise with bogus violations. Cale casually invites him to make the call. Adrian sneers, promising absolute ruin. The stark lesson here is obvious. Weak men will always target your wealth, completely incapable of understanding someone who values brutal loyalty far beyond mere paper currency. Kale leans closer, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper. It is the signature of an apex predator. They quiet down right before the killing stroke. He murmurs that despite Adrian's fortunes, he made one catastrophic error. Adrian demands to know what that is. Kale dissects him with clinical precision. He explains that Adrian confused genuine power with hoarding dirty secrets. Blackmail only works on a man who cares about his public reflection. Adrian's false armor splinters. Kale confesses, his eyes devoid of warmth, that he cares nothing for scandal or politics. He answers only to his own brutal code. It is a chilling reminder. Never provoke a war with a man who has absolutely nothing to lose. He will gladly burn your entire kingdom to ash just to feel the warmth of the fire. Kale delivers his ultimatum. Adrian will never draw breath near Serafina again. Adrian's control finally snaps. He shouts, claiming ownership over her. Kale vivisects him with 3 quiet words. She does not. Adrian loses his grip, ranting wildly about their past, insisting he was her savior. The true horror is that Adrian genuinely believes his twisted fairy tale. Kale cuts through the delusion, laying bare the suffocating isolation Adrian disguised as affection. That is not romance, Kale whispers. It is a hostage situation. Adrian launches to his feet, declaring the conversation over. Kale remains carved from stone. The tragic flaw of every abuser is profound. They mistake brutal possession for true love, and they shatter into violent pieces when reality finally exposes them. Kale softly commands him to sit down. Adrian spits an arrogant "excuse me." Kale repeats it. The words are so laced with quiet danger that Adrian's survival instinct takes over, and he sinks back into the leather. Kale slides a second dossier across the table. Adrian opens it, and the camera captures the exact second his confidence dies. The pages reveal catastrophic financial rot and hidden accounts Adrian swore were buried. He looks hollowed out, whispering a plea for the source. Kale replies that he knows people. Adrian stammers that Kale cannot do this. Kale's eyes go dead as he whispers, "I already did." The tragic lesson here is pure poetry. Those who walk the earth, convinced they are untouchable, will always leave the most devastating evidence scattered behind them. Kale remains perfectly still, quietly dismantling a king. He explains the authorities have the tip, and the board will see the file in 3 days. Adrian's hand begins to shake. He tries to accuse Kale of bluffing, desperate to hold on to his crumbling dominance. Kale lets the heavy silence stretch out, gently inviting him to call the bluff. Adrian realizes with dread that he is locked in a cage with a true predator. When he weakly asks what Kale wants, the answer is simple: stay away from Serafina. Adrian cannot fathom losing his empire over one person. Kale smooths his cuffs, noting he has not actually destroyed anything yet. The lesson here is undeniable. True power never has to raise its voice. It simply hands you a match and waits for you to set your own world on fire. Let us pause and examine this beautifully brutal collision of egos. Kale is not simply threatening Adrian. He is surgically tearing apart his universe. He leans into the dim light and lays out the exact sequence of annihilation. First the feds, then the board, and finally the absolute death blow. The senator's daughter Adrian calls a wife. Adrian sits paralyzed, the blood draining from his face, as he understands he brought a pocket knife to a nuclear strike. Kale offers an empty smile, proving that unlike cheap street bullies, he actually pulls the trigger. The irony suffocates the room, but the takeaway is incredibly clear. The loudest man in the room is almost never the true threat. Genuine power remains utterly quiet. dismantling everything you have ever loved while you watch. Then the camera follows Cale to the door, letting that devastating reality settle into the bones of his enemy. He leaves the final ultimatum hanging in the dead air, forcing Adrian to walk away or lose his empire. Adrian tries to throw up one last pathetic shield, but Cale simply steps out, denying the man a final word. It is a brilliant display of psychological warfare. The scene cuts back to Serafina, shattering the mood. 2 hours later, she is still curled up in the dim security office, staring blankly at the monitors. When Cale returns, she jolts so hard she nearly spills her coffee. It is a harsh truth for all of us to learn. Escaping a toxic situation is only the first step. Healing a terrified mind takes far more time and patience than simply walking out the door. You and I know a cornered narcissist is a dangerous thing. Serafina feels that truth in her bones. When Cale claims Adrian will back off, she desperately wants to buy into that logic. But psychological bonds do not vanish just because someone commands them to disappear. Her voice shakes as she whispers her fear, asking what happens if Adrian refuses to stop. Watch the framing here carefully. This is the exact moment Cale's calm mask drops. He looks her dead in the eyes and promises to make Adrian regret it. The absolute certainty in his quiet voice is chilling. It teaches us a grim but vital truth about the real world. Sometimes, polite boundaries are never enough to stop a true predator. You need someone willing to stand in the dark and fight the monsters on their own brutal terms. The saddest part of this framed exchange is watching Serafina shrink back into the shadows. She quietly reminds him that she never asked for a white knight, having paid the agonizing price for the actions of violent men far too many times. Cale does not argue. The camera pushes in as his eyes lock onto hers, and he drops the most tragic truth of the film. Someone should have stepped between them 2 years ago, seen the dark bruises, and made the nightmare end. Her defensive walls finally crack, hot tears spilling over, because hearing that acknowledgement is a profound grief. She tells him it is not his job to fix her life. But Cale shows us a beautiful lesson here. You do not have to be responsible for someone's brokenness to help them find a way to heal. The human brain cannot turn off its survival mode just because the threat left the room. Cale tells her to go back to normal, but asking a victim to let their guard down is like asking them to stop breathing. 3 agonizing days drag by in cinematic slow motion. The suffocating silence from Adrian is worse than the abuse itself because her mind is hardwired to expect the crushing blow. By the 4th night, the tension in the dim room is thick enough to choke on. She is nervously organizing his study when Cale walks in with wine. She tries to hide behind the busy work, but he sees right through the facade. He knows she is terrified. The lesson here is to always give yourself grace. Healing is never a straight line, and sometimes you just need to allow yourself a moment of quiet. Watch her body language closely in this tragic scene. Cale pours 2 glasses without asking, and she automatically takes one. It is that deeply ingrained conditioning speaking for her. She obeys the commands of powerful men without a single conscious thought. She weakly protests drinking on the job, but Cale smiles and tells her she is getting a promotion. It is sweet, but then the camera deliberately lingers on the glass. It is a French vintage, the exact wine Adrian drank while cruelly mocking her lack of class. After a few sips loosen her nerves, she asks how he knew his threat would work. Cale simply swirls the red liquid in the dim light. It is a heavy truth that the ghosts of our past will always sit at our table, but we are the ones who get to choose if we drink with them. Kale lays out the anatomy of a tyrant with clinical precision. He explains that men like Adrian build their lives on the fragile glass illusion of absolute control. The second you shatter that mirror, they fold completely. It is a brilliant analysis, but Sarafina points out the glaring hypocrisy. Kale is also a man who rules his world with an iron fist. The air between them suddenly becomes heavy. A dark shadow crosses his sharp features, and he drops a line that hits like a freight train. He whispers that he knows the boundary between control and cruelty. Adrian never did. It is a devastating and essential distinction. The lesson here is profound. Power itself is not inherently evil. What matters is having the self-awareness to know where your shadows end and someone else's begins. This is the frame where the emotional vault finally clicks open. Kale never talks about his guarded past, but here he is handing her his darkest chapter. He tells her his sister died of an overdose at 19. He does not soften the blow, calling it an escape from their abusive father. And here is where the scene breaks your heart. Sarafina instantly absorbs his heavy pain. She is conditioned to carry the baggage of broken men, so she starts apologizing to him. But Kale refuses her pity. He proves he recognizes Adrian's exact brand of poison in her veins, refusing to let her take the blame. The takeaway here is a beautiful truth. The deepest bonds are rarely built on flawless perfection. They are forged in the quiet moments when two people finally recognize each other's hidden scars. The conversation then takes a bone-chilling turn. When she asks what happened to his father, Kale's eyes go entirely dead. He calmly states that the man learned what happens when you push a victim too far. He does not confess to murder, but the lethal implication hangs in the room like a loaded gun. Fast forward 1 week, and the fragile illusion of safety shatters. Sarafina is walking home when she spots Adrian. Her reaction is utterly visceral. Her nervous system just shuts down. The groceries slip out of her numb hands, apples rolling into the gutter. Adrian just stands there, silently feeding off the terror he can still inflict without lifting a finger. It forces us to face a heavy truth. Walking away is a singular event, but truly breaking free is an exhausting daily battle. You and I have seen some sick manipulation tactics together, but this one takes the prize. Adrian flashes a warm, melancholic smile, the exact kind that used to mean she was safe. He mouths that he misses her. It is a calculated strike at her trauma bond, designed to scramble her fragile brain. Sarafina immediately starts to dissociate. Her vision tunnels, and she forgets how to breathe. She needs to run, but the chains of abuse bolt her to the concrete. Just as she is about to collapse, Kale steps into the frame. He physically blocks Adrian from her sight, severing the toxic visual leash. He demands her focus, forcing his grounded reality over her waking nightmare. The lesson is vital. When the dark past tries to drag you under, find someone who fiercely anchors you to the present. The way the camera frames Kale handling her panic is brilliant. He does not smother her. He stays close, giving her paralyzed nervous system the quiet space to function. Once the roaring in her ears fades, she whispers a broken question. Terrified her abuser is still watching, Kale slowly scans the street with the cold eyes of an apex predator. Adrian is gone. The adrenaline abandons Sarafina, and she drops heavily to the curb. She believed the nightmare was over, but to a narcissist, a boundary is just a twisted invitation. Kale crouches beside her, and you see the exact moment the protector dies, and the hunter wakes up. He pulls out his phone with lethal intent. It shows us that true protection is not just offering a safe harbor. Sometimes it is being willing to sink the enemy ships. Let us step into this scene together and observe the pure terror of a man who tears up the social contract. Cale ignores his security team and their excuses, demanding exact coordinates. This is not someone who waits for a judge. He pulls Serafina to her trembling feet, leaving her groceries scattered on the floor, and marches her into the glowing control room. Cale slices through the panic, demanding the visual feed. On the monitor, Adrian stands perfectly still for 90 agonizing seconds. He smiles into the lens like a malicious phantom before vanishing into the dark. He only wanted to prove he could still control her pulse. It teaches us a vital lesson about our past wounds. Never let a lingering ghost convince you they still hold the keys to your home. Picture the framing of this shot. Adrian slips into the damp subway, totally aware of the cameras tracking his moves. He is no longer just stalking her, he is playing a psychological game of dominance. Watch how Serafina observes Cale from the doorway. She looks past his expensive suit and sees the ruthless crime boss underneath. Cale barks orders to his men like a general drawing up battle lines. Then he locks Serafina inside the glass penthouse. He genuinely believes he is acting as the ultimate shield, but notice the bitter irony. For a woman who just clawed her way out of a mental cell, his shelter feels exactly like a trap. Sometimes the massive walls we build to keep the monsters outside only turn us into prisoners all over again. Examine the emotional wreckage of this moment. Serafina presses her palms against the bulletproof glass, pleading for her ordinary days back. But Cale hands her a freezing reality check. The predator has stepped over a fatal line. His voice stays level, but the dead calm in his eyes promises murder. Cut to the dead of night. Heavy shadows swallow Serafina whole as her trauma sinks its teeth in. Her exhausted brain projects Adrian's arrogant smile against the dark bedroom walls. This highlights the absolute tragedy of a broken spirit, showing how pure terror loves to dress itself up as romance. We learn that the heaviest scars are often carved by the hands we once held the tightest. Defeated by her frayed nerves, she wanders into the cold silence of 3 a.m. She finds Cale in the dim kitchen. The atmosphere around him hums with a dark hunger for the hunt. The marble island is buried under a mountain of surveillance, displaying the complete paper anatomy of a doomed man. Serafina asks what all this means, her voice barely holding together. Cale looks up and whispers that it means everything. His eyes are bloodshot, but his focus is as sharp as a razor. He admits his quiet warning to Adrian fell on deaf ears. The arrogant narcissist dared to call his bluff. Cale slowly squares off the stacks of paper with chilling, methodical precision. The brief era of polite warnings is officially over. He is no longer a bodyguard. He is an executioner preparing the block. It reminds us that true danger rarely screams and shouts. It usually arrives with a quiet, calculated whisper. I want us to look at the psychology playing out here. Serafina breathes her question into the quiet room, her body trembling. She feels the violence rolling off Cale's skin. He offers a cold rationale for what comes next. He sees Adrian's cis-obsession not as twisted love, but as a lesser man trespassing on a king's domain. Adrian treated her like a stolen object, and Cale's massive ego cannot let that slide. She begs him to stop, pleading to avoid irreversible bloodshed. Cale merely promises his conscience will be perfectly clean. He breaks down Adrian's manipulative tactics with terrifying accuracy, explaining exactly how her mental cage was built. It leads to a brutal realization about human nature. Sometimes, it takes a genuine monster to fully understand the cold gears turning inside another monster's head. Cale details the brutal reality of the last 6 months, speaking with the steady rhythm of a funeral march. Then he makes a chilling vow. The nightmare ends tonight. Look at the twisted psychology in this frame. Kale's lethal energy should make any sane person run. But for a woman who has never had a real protector, his capacity for murder feels like a thick stone wall. Serafina is a mosaic of broken glass, secretly desperate to watch her abuser burn. She finally surrenders, whispering her submission. Kale reaches out, his large hand completely swallowing hers. Where Adrian's touch felt like a steel trap, Kale's grip is a dangerous kind of sanctuary. He asks only for her blind faith. It leaves us with a grim truth about survival. Sometimes, the only effective shield against a creeping demon is a much bigger, darker devil. She hands over her trust entirely. Watching her fractured spirit latch onto this lethal man is a masterclass in tragic cinematic beauty. Within hours, Kale conducts a ruthless symphony of destruction aimed at Adrian as perfect public image. The wealthy wife files for an explosive divorce, and the ugly details of his abuse dominate the morning news. The camera holds tight on Serafina. Her mind spins as she realizes the man who seemed like an untouchable god is finally bleeding. Kale walks into the shot, looking perfectly at home in the chaos he manufactured. He does not ask if she saw the broadcast. He senses the shift in the room. The days of cowering in the dark are done. They are stepping into the blinding light. It proves that to truly conquer our deepest fears, we often must be willing to burn the entire stage to ashes. Stick with me here because the entire dynamic is flipping. When Serafina questions the cruelty of his tactics, Kale offers a remorseless shrug. He tore his rival apart using the jagged edge of truth, feeding the wife poisoned secrets. Serafina panics, terrified that Adrian will know who pulled the trigger. A dark smirk crosses Kale's face. That is the point. He wants Adrian to choke on the defeat. Retaliation comes fast when corporate suits swarm Kale's businesses in a desperate flex of power, but his legal team swats them away like flies. Look closely at the tension in this scene. This is no longer a rescue mission. It is a violent arena where two apex predators are circling each other to the death. It is a stark reminder that unchecked ego is a heavy poison, one that always blinds a proud man to his own open grave. Kale absorbs the attack on his financial empire without blinking an eye. He drops his phone and hits her with a commanding stare, telling her to pack her bags right now. Her nervous system rebels. She wants to cling to the fake safety of the penthouse. Kale shatters that illusion with ice-cold logic. Adrian's ego is cracking, turning the entire city into a concrete death trap. As the sun dips below the skyline, they slip out of Manhattan in a heavy armored vehicle. Kale takes the wheel himself. He sent his security team away, fully aware that when the knives come out, trusting anyone is a fatal mistake. When she stares into the shadows and asks where they are going, he mentions an isolated house in the woods. It highlights a painful rule of true survival. To stay alive, you often must abandon everything familiar and walk straight into the terrifying dark. Notice how the camera frames this sequence. As the city fades into the rearview mirror, the emotional core of the story cracks open. Serafina quietly offers him an out. Her voice is barely a whisper as she says he should have thrown her to the wolves to save his empire. It is a heartbreaking look at trauma. She is so used to cruelty that she anticipates her own disposal. But watch Kale's hands. His knuckles turn bone white against the steering wheel. The cold crime boss refuses the easy exit. Pushed to his limit, his mask of indifference shatters. He admits that her life actually matters to him. For a man who treats people like currency, this is a massive emotional surrender. He refuses to let a lesser beast extinguish his only light. Real love sometimes means fighting fiercely for someone who has completely forgotten how to value themselves. Pay attention to the shift in the visual palette here. This woodland sanctuary is the exact opposite of Kale's cold glass skyscraper. The camera wraps us in heavy mahogany, raw stone, and thick trees that swallow the horizon. Kale leads her to a warm bedroom and tells her to get some sleep. But trauma does not evaporate just because you lit a fire. Her mind is still an active war zone. She lies rigid under the blankets, staring into the dark, waiting for Adrian to break down the door. Her fear is completely justified. Adrian is now a starving animal who has lost his money, reputation, and control. When you steal a proud man's mirror, he does not quietly disappear. He turns into a blind hurricane of revenge. It reveals a chilling fact about human behavior. You only see what a person is truly made of when you violently rip away every single one of their daily comforts. Let us unpack this morning scene together, because the subtext here is incredible. Exhaustion finally drags Sarafina into sleep. She wakes to the smell of fresh coffee, finding Kale doing something strangely normal in the kitchen. Through a window, it looks like a peaceful morning. But for someone wired for abuse, this gentle domestic warmth physically hurts. He passes her a hot mug, their eyes never meeting. The quiet is deafening. Then, Kale speaks in a flat, clinical tone. He explains his lawyers are suffocating Adrian with a mountain of restraining orders. Kale knows a piece of paper will never stop a rabid dog. It is a calculated chess move. He is building an ironclad alibi, so when the blood finally spills, the law will look the other way. We learn that true peace is usually an illusion. It is often just the long, quiet breath a person takes right before a brutal war begins. Let us look at the grim arithmetic of obsession together. Kale outlines a collapsing world, noting that Adrian's empire is crumbling. He draws a harsh boundary. Within 14 days, this tormentor will either vanish completely or fracture and come for their lives. The camera pushes in on a terrifying shift in Kale. Meeting Sarafina's gaze with dead eyes, he vows to personally put this man into the cold earth. There is zero hesitation. Instead of feeling protected, her blood turns to ice. She sees he is willing to sacrifice his humanity to finish this, and begs him not to butcher his soul, just to burn Adrian. It is a haunting truth we all eventually face. When you set out to destroy a monster, you must be incredibly careful not to grow your own claws in the dark. Let us examine the agonizing symmetry of this moment together. The true horror is not his descent into violence, but the unblinking way Kale stares into her soul, offering himself as a shield rather than an angel of death. When she challenges him, his iron restraint cracks for a single heartbeat. He cannot allow the situation to fracture, knowing that a shattered plan means a fatal loss of control. He calmly gathers their plates while Sarafina sits frozen, her mind spinning wildly out of control. We feel the suffocating weight of her realization pressing down on the room. Did she escape the burning inferno of one madman, only to lock herself inside the freezing, sterile glass cage of another? The deepest tragedy is that our most desperate escapes often forge our heaviest chains. For 5 days, the outside world ceases to exist, sealed behind heavy velvet curtains. By day, Kyle commands his corporate empire from a kitchen table, orchestrating financial ruin like a warlord moving pawns. As dusk bleeds into night, the fireplace strips away their armor. She confesses a bitter irony. As a scholar of coercive control, she had become the textbook victim of her own studies. It reveals a tragic truth about human nature. Brilliant intellect offers no shield against the slow poison of a charismatic abuser. By the fifth night, their fragile peace shatters. She tearfully begs to know their ultimate fate. The firelight casts hollow shadows across Kyle's face as he delivers a chilling vow. Adrian will be erased from this earth, or Kyle will happily dig his own grave. She tries to pull him back from the moral edge, but Kyle is playing with a stacked deck. The camera pushes in as he coldly recites the names of monsters he has dismantled, men whose darkness makes Adrian look like a fleeting shadow. He guarantees her survival, but his vow to pay whatever the cost drops the temperature in the room. Panic rises in her chest. Terrified, he will sacrifice his soul for her safety. It is a classic projection from a damaged heart. We often assume others share our moral fragility, yet Kyle does not flinch. His expression is carved from solid stone as he softly corrects her. He is not corrupting himself for her salvation, because he embraced his own damnation decades ago. He is simply slipping the heavy steel chain off the sleeping predator inside. You and I must brace ourselves, because this is where the tragedy truly takes hold. When she whispers the question of why he is doing this, the silence is suffocating. Kyle looks at her, the harsh lighting softening in his eyes. He does not see a shattered bird. He looks upon her as a walking miracle. He sees a woman dragged through hell, who crawled out to rebuild her mind piece by bloody piece. He tells her such fierce resilience is a rarity, and he refuses to let the dark extinguish her light. Sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is let someone else believe in strength. Fighting back tears, she shrinks away from her own power. She presses her spine against the freezing window pane, whispering her absolute terror of finally shattering into useless dust. She lays bare the tragic fear inside every survivor, the dread that her fractured mind lacks the foundation to withstand another earthquake. The camera focuses on Kyle S. boots as he steps close, stopping short of a touch. In this bleak narrative, deliberate restraint is the purest form of reverence. His voice rumbles, offering to lend her the ruthless machinery of his mind until hers can mend. The profound life lesson here is that true protection does not smother. It becomes an unyielding fortress while the wounded heal inside. Kyle notes Adrian's fatal flaw. His blinding ego prevents him from seeing how far a predator will go to defend his own. This mounting tension is abruptly severed by the shrill vibration of a phone. The glowing screen cuts through the darkness. Marcus is calling. Observe the physical shift in Kyle's frame as he turns to stone. The air in the room becomes dangerously brittle. He barks rapid questions into the receiver, throwing the estate into a suffocating lockdown. He turns to deliver it to blow. Adrian has bypassed their perimeter and is waiting in their Manhattan lobby. We learn a hard truth here. True chaos never knocks. It slips quietly through the cracks we forget to seal. The ensuing drive through the city is a cinematic study in restrained violence. Kyle's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel chokes the leather. You can hear his blood boiling beneath his skin. His jaw is locked in a murderous clamp as he glares through the rain, lashing the windshield. Beside him, Serafina unravels into quiet panic. Suddenly, the phone vibrates. Marcus delivers a sickening update. Adrian has staked his claim in the lobby, weaponizing his arrogant patience to establish dominance. Serafina S. breathing grows jagged, but Kyle remains an unblinking monument of marble. To him, prey foolishly anchoring itself in one spot is a gift. Let us pause here together, you and I, to appreciate the silent calculus of an apex predator. Arrogance is often the quietest architect of our own destruction. They descend into the garage just after midnight. the slick concrete reflecting like shattered black mirrors. Kyle kills the engine, plunging the cabin into a suffocating silence. He sits motionless in the dark. She begs to know his plan, her fragile voice breaking in the shadows. His answer is a hollow, chilling whisper. He claims he is just going to talk. She knows the devastating truth immediately. Men like Kyle never simply talk. When she demands to know what shifted, his head slowly pivots. His eyes are vacant. Yet the air in the car smells strongly of ignited gasoline. He softly confesses to a grave miscalculation. He had attempted to wage a gentleman's war against an opponent who rejects reality. The vital life lesson here is profound. Applying logic to a raging narcissist is exactly like trying to reason with a burning house. You only end up suffocating in the smoke. The sharp click of his seatbelt releasing signals the death of civility. Before she can draw a breath, he is out the door, stalking toward the elevator banks like an executioner. She scrambles wildly to follow his shadow. The sheer silence inside that ascending metal cage is absolute suffocation. Her mind fractures into survival mode, leading to a heartbreaking moment. She frantically offers to surrender herself to the monster, simply to make the exhausting fear stop. Kyle severs that thought instantly. He dissects Adrian's sick strategy with surgical precision. This is not a negotiation. It is calculated psychological terrorism. Designed to prove her sanctuary is a fragile illusion. Giving in to a tyrant never buys peace. It only funds their next extortion. Kyle names the demon as absolute psychological warfare. His voice drops into a dark frequency, vowing they will endure this bloodshed side by side. The elevator chimes, the steel doors sliding apart on floor 42 to reveal an anxious Marcus. Adrian is using the bright lights of a public lobby as an impenetrable legal shield to execute his mental torture. Kyle shifts instantly into the cold commander of a battlefield. He orders Marcus to drag Serafina into the impenetrable penthouse vault. Her chin trembles as she attempts to stand her against the architect of her ruin. Kyle holds her gaze with an iron intensity, silently obliterating her defiance. He makes it devastatingly clear that preserving her life is the only acceptable victory. True strength is knowing when to seek shelter so you can live to fight another day. She weeps in bitter frustration as Marcus physically maneuvers her into the secure corridor. Over her shoulder, she is forced to watch Kyle willingly descend into the jaws of the beast. Far below, the cavernous marble lobby is entirely deserted, save for the author of this tragedy. Adrian Mercer lounges on a pristine leather sofa, radiating a sickly, triumphant glow. Let us analyze this brilliant framing together. The camera captures Adrian in a pathetic masquerade. Draped in fine fabrics, he projects the aura of a businessman rather than a stalker. It is a stark reminder that you can dress toxicity in expensive suits, but the poison underneath remains the same. As Kyle's heavy boots echo across the marble, Adrian rises with a greasy, theatrical smile, acting thankful for the audience. Kyle does not grant him a blink. He closes the distance with the terrifying momentum of a freight train, halting only when the air between their faces vanishes. A terrified night guard hovers at the perimeter. Without shifting his murderous gaze from Adrian, Kyle issues a guttural command for the guard to leave. The young man flees into the shadows, leaving these two predators sealed together in this sprawling, dimly lit tomb. The storm outside feels almost poetic. Sheets of rain batter the penthouse glass, blurring the city lights into a weeping, smeared canvas. It sets a beautiful stage for the psychological autopsy we are about to witness. Kyle steps up, trying to command the room, but Adrian pulls off the ultimate narcissist maneuver. He barely tilts his head, spinning a grand, delusional fantasy of profound romance and dismissing Kyle as cheap hired muscle. You can see the light die in Kyle's eyes before he delivers a brutal truth. Stalking a shattered woman until her spirit suffocates is not romance. It is pure parasitic abuse. The lesson here is profound. Obsession dresses itself up as love, but it only ever exists to consume the host. You and I are about to watch Kyle take this arrogant parasite apart, piece by bloody piece. Let us pause the frame right here. We need to unpack this masterclass in textbook manipulation. Notice the microscopic twitch as Adrian's cool mask finally slips. He minimizes his reign of terror, reducing severe psychological warfare to simply standing on a sidewalk and sending a few bokeys. The most tragic reality of any abuser is that they genuinely cast themselves as the misunderstood savior. He steps into Kyle's orbit, weaponizing his height to claim his actions were born of devotion. Kyle plants his boots, bracing his body for the heavy violence of a street fight. But here is the bitterest twist. Adrian does not throw a punch. His pale hand slips into his coat and retrieves a phone. In this modern arena of cruelty, a brightly lit screen will always lacerate a man's soul far deeper than any physical blade. Adrian presents the glowing screen with the merciless precision of a trauma surgeon. He coldly taps the timestamp, logging the date to 8 months ago, weeks before her disappearance. The camera pans down to the footage. There sits Sarafina in a warmly lit restaurant, her hand intimately resting over Marcus Chen's. She radiates a bright, untethered energy that Kyle has never been permitted to witness. Adrian narrates this betrayal like a prosecutor reading a death sentence, detailing a secret 6-week affair to slowly twist the psychological knife. The tape ends as they walk into the night together. It is an excruciating revelation that leaves us with a harrowing truth. A suffocating mind will desperately claw for any possible exit, even if it means weaving a massive web of deceit just to survive another day. Picture the atmosphere in that room. The oxygen simply vanishes, leaving Kyle to suffocate in the slate gray lighting. You can almost hear the foundation of his reality cracking. Adrian stands there, bathed in the cold glow of his phone, his voice unnervingly steady. He casually admits to hiring the stalkers, but then he perfectly twists the blade. He claims Sarafina was actually the one who drove him to madness. Pocketing the device, his face melts into the flawless portrait of a tragically betrayed lover. It is the ultimate psychological theft. A predator completely stealing his victim's bleeding narrative. His voice breaks at the exact right second, swearing he only wanted peace. Kyle remains frozen in the dark. It reminds us of a brutal truth. The deadliest weapon a man can face is a masterful lie that turns his own noble heart against him. Pulls tight on Kyle's face. His mind spins out of control, desperate to find some hidden flaw in this digital forgery. But the footage is undeniably clear. When he finally accuses Adrian of lying, the quiet tremor in his own voice gives him away. He is a drowning man grasping at smoke. Adrian catches the scent of blood in the water instantly. His expression hardens into a mask of righteous fury, demanding that Kyle ask Sarafina about her secret meetings. Kyle's knuckles turn bone white as his fists clench. He roars for the man to get out, his shout echoing against the glass. Adrian turns to leave, yet lingers long enough to play the wounded saint one last time. It exposes a deeply tragic reality of human nature. Those who break us will always demand the absolute privilege of writing our final chapter. Adrian drops his final venomous warning, stating that Kyle's hero complex will be his undoing. Then he is gone. The door clicks shut, leaving a suffocating silence broken only by the rain punishing the window. Kyle stands paralyzed, feeling the foundation of his life turning to dust beneath his boots. We open 40 minutes later in the penthouse. Serafina wears a path into the rug, pacing like a frantic moth trapped in a jar. She throws panicked questions the moment Kyle enters, but the words die in her throat. His face is chiseled from unfeeling marble. The protective warmth she always relied on is completely extinguished. He looks right through her soul and quietly asks what she knows about Marcus Chen. It reminds us of a bitter, undeniable reality. Any life built entirely on shadows will inevitably shatter the second it touches the light. Watch her physical reaction in this moment, because the tragedy is absolute. The instant he speaks that forbidden name, the blood vanishes from her face. Her hands flutter nervously, like dying birds. Kyle watches this damning response, and the heavy door of denial slams shut in his mind. Serafina scrambles for excuses, but Kyle slices straight through the noise. He demands a simple yes or no, his voice so hollow it hurts worse than any violent scream. Real tears spill down her cheeks as the confession slips past her lips. Kyle physically recoils. He retreats into his study, pouring a drink just to give his shaking hands a purpose. She trails behind him, clinging to the horrors of her past to justify her deceit. But the truth is merciless. The deep pain we carry from yesterday never gives us the right to poison the pure trust we are given today. Kyle steps into the harsh light, methodically tearing her carefully woven story to shreds. He maps out the anatomy of her betrayal, the calculated lies and reckless mistakes that handed her abuser the exact ammunition he craved. Serafina shakes is like a leaf, begging him to understand her terror. She paints a harrowing picture of surviving a tyrant, suffocating under his surveillance. Marcus was merely her stolen breath of air, a brief illusion of normalcy where she felt like a person who was simply heard. She swears those meetings were innocent, yet the tragic flaw in her design is glaring. She built a massive fortress of lies to escape a monster, hiding behind her fear of retaliation. It highlights a heartbreaking reality. Sometimes our most desperate struggles to survive only end up building us a brand new, inescapable cage. She understood her tormentor's twisted mind, knowing he would weaponize any misstep to justify his cruelty. But then Kyle delivers a verbal blow that stops her heart. With surgical, terrifying coldness, he suggests her deceit was actually the match that lit the fire, rather than a desperate reaction to it. The accusation sends her staggering backward. The camera holds steady on Kyle as he spirals into his own abyss. He hurls her tragic tale right back at her, recounting every law he fractured and the powerful men he ruined in her name. He fought a holy war while wearing a blindfold. Beneath his unblinking stare, you witness the agonizing death of his pride. He realizes he was never the brave knight. He was just a disposable pawn. True betrayal does not merely break our hearts. It reaches deep inside and completely destroys our own reflection in the mirror. He pins her with a gaze devoid of humanity, blaming her for incinerating their foundation of absolute trust. She cries out, desperate to preserve the sanctity of her suffering. And then, the marble statue breaks. Kyle unleashes a thunderous, primal roar of sheer agony that makes her physically recoil. It is a terrifying slip of his stoic mask. He closes his eyes, pulls a heavy breath into his lungs, and locks the wounded beast away. When his eyes reopen, nothing remains but glacial ice. He quietly orders her to pack her bags. Serafina shatters, assuming this is a professional firing. But his tone drips with venom as he reclassifies her as a compromised asset. He ignores her sobbing convinced every tear is just more theatrical manipulation. We must remember this simple truth. Trust, once shattered, turns every future plea into an empty, transparent stage play. Let us look closer at this moment, you and I. Kyle is doing something far more violent than simply evicting her. He is systematically dismantling her very identity. He strips away the crown of the innocent martyr, exposing a flawed woman sprinting from her own deceits. He drifts toward the glass, staring into the bleak city night. His voice drops into a whisper as he mourns his own arrogance. Here is a man who built an empire on reading shadows, only to be totally blinded by a woman's tears. He marched straight into hell for a tragic story he never verified. His internal compass is utterly shattered. Serafina's legs finally surrender, collapsing into a chair. She chants her horrific past like a desperate prayer, begging him to believe the abuse was real. We must learn this painful, enduring lesson. A half-truth is always a beautiful, highly destructive lie. She pours out her trauma, detailing the hidden cameras, the crushing isolation, and the twisted games built to destroy her sanity. Kyle absorbs every detail, his posture heavy with a terrifying, bone-deep exhaustion. But his boundary is now forged from solid iron. He states that suffering in the past does not grant anyone the right to lie to the hand saving them today. She tries to split the difference between lying and withholding, but his cold correction cuts her down. Silence swallows the room, broken only by the rain punishing the glass. The city moves on, indifferent to the absolute annihilation of their bond. When she finally asks what he expects, he demands the impossible. He needs her to stand in his shoes and truly feel his total ruin. The lesson here is remarkably clear. A deep wound can never truly heal while someone is still holding the knife. So, here we are at the bitter end. Let us look at the wreckage together and ask who truly won this tragic game. Kyle confesses he feels like a discarded tool, and Serafina cannot even deny it. She painted an immaculate portrait of a dragon and a helpless princess, pulling his every string. She became so fluent in manipulating her tormentor that she instinctively manipulated her savior. Kyle no longer cares about her reasons, he just points to the door. When she sobs about having nothing left, he transfers $20,000 to her account. It is a sterile transaction that severs them forever. We often forget that survival can cost us our very humanity. Love does not die in the heat of battle, it always dies quickest in the absolute cold. Notice how utterly devoid of warmth this farewell is. He calls the money a simple severance package, removing every trace of humanity from the room. That crushing finality shatters her remaining psychological armor. Watch her trembling hands as she retreats toward the exit. She whispers a broken apology, but beneath the tears lies a bitter irony. She does not regret burning her world down to escape her abuser. Kyle just stands there, a hollow shell of the man he once was. 15 minutes later, her entire existence is crammed into 2 cheap canvas bags. Resting at the top is a worn paperback on coercive control, sitting like a quiet tombstone over a sanctuary blown to pieces. We must remember that true safety is a fragile luxury the broken can rarely afford. We are witnessing the fallout of an acute mental collapse. Marcus, the loyal driver, watches from the doorway as she zips up her ruined life. He gently offers a ride, but she weaves a pathetic excuse about catching a subway at 2 in the morning. He shakes his head, piercing her fragile facade. The elevator descent is an ocean of suffocating silence. Marcus loads her bags and asks for a destination. She whispers the address of a Brooklyn shelter, the exact purgatory she hid in 6 months ago. Gliding across the dark bridge, Marcus breaks his professional wall. Catching her eyes in the rearview mirror, he softly says that he believes her. It reminds us that even in our most devastating chapters, a single act of human grace can be enough to keep us breathing. The camera pushes tight on Sarafina, neon streetlights washing her face in harsh flashes. Her trauma violently hijacks her nervous system. She whips around, eyes wide with animal terror, asking if Marcus knows what Adrian did. Marcus remains a statue, his gaze locked on the road. He admits he has driven Kyle for 8 years and never seen him unravel. Kyle only fights for people in genuine danger, yet whatever poisoned lie Adrian fed him made a man of steel doubt his own mind. Sarafina asks if she deserves this hell. Marcus does not flinch. He tells her the truth is uglier than anyone wants to accept. You and I have probably both made this mistake of running from the dark. But to survive, you must look your own brokenness directly in the eye. Before the sedan pulls away, Marcus offers a lifeline she never asked for, telling her to call if the shadows close in. Her trauma instantly sharpens her tone. Why would Kyle's loyal man extend a hand? Marcus turns, his expression heavy with sorrow. He tells her that working for a powerful man does not mean selling your soul. He offers a crisp card, and her trembling fingers accept it just as the taillights bleed into the fog. Picture the isolation of this wide shot. It is 3 in the morning. She stands shivering on a frozen Brooklyn sidewalk, clutching $20,000 that burns like dirty money. After the shelter turns her away, she surrenders to a cheap, Lower East Side hostel. We quickly learn that money cannot buy true refuge when your spirit is already broken. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? This is where the psychological pressure cooker boils over. The grimy room costs $50. Through thin walls, the muffled weeping of strangers seeps into her skull. She lies on a stained mattress, gripping the edge of sanity when her phone vibrates. Her heart hammers. The screen glows in the dark. I heard you left, Kyle. My door is open. Adrian moves like a phantom, ensuring his presence chokes her. She blocks him, clinging to an illusion of control. 10 seconds later, a new number lights up warning her she cannot run forever. This is the tragic art of a true predator. They do not build a cage. They make you realize the cage never had doors. The chilling lesson is that the worst prisons are the ones we carry within ourselves. That is the frame where her emotional dam shatters. With a guttural cry, she hurls the phone against the peeling wallpaper. She drags the blanket over her head, weeping violently to purge the poison from her veins. For 3 days, the camera follows a ghost. She drifts through the concrete grid in hollow dissociation, surviving on bitter coffee and the lonely armor of being invisible. She begs for cash jobs in dim kitchens, but the cold city ignores her. On the 4th morning, the cracked phone rings. Her instincts scream to ignore it, but starvation forces her hand. A calm, elegant voice speaks. Catherine Mercer. It reminds us that when absolute isolation pulls you under, even a total stranger's voice can sound like salvation. True desperation will always blind us to the trap. The camera cuts tight as Sarafina jolts upright on the stained mattress, trembling as she demands the caller's identity. Catherine drops a devastating truth. She is Adrian's former wife, and time is running out. Sarafina spirals, terrified of how this woman found her, but Catherine's cold composure slices through the panic. She warns that Adrian is actively weaponizing the justice system. He intends to sue Kyle, positioning Sarafina as his star witness. The room's audio fades, leaving only Sarafina's shallow breathing as her blood turns to ice. Catherine reveals Adrian has been obsessively recording their every move. We learn a tragic lesson about unchecked power here. Give a hollow soul enough wealth, and they will eagerly forge the law itself into a butcher's knife. Bending reality is the signature of a psychological architect. Catherine explains Adrian is weaving a sick fairy tale, casting himself as the victim whose girlfriend was stolen by a billionaire. Catherine knows it is fabricated, but Adrian is a genius at dressing fiction in a tailored suit. He has a mountain of ruin, prepared secretly filmed videos, purchased testimonies, and a paper trail of Kyle's $20,000. For a fraction of a second, Catherine's composure cracks. She whispers that he will annihilate them both if they do not strike back. Sarafina begins to hyperventilate, begging to know why a former wife would risk her skin for a stranger. We see that the strongest alliances are often forged not by mutual friendship, but by the shared terror of a mutual monster. Listen to Catherine's cold warning. Once Adrian decides you slighted him, he will not rest until your existence is a smoking crater. She demands a secret meeting in 2 hours. The line dies, and a Tribeca address appears on the screen. Sarafina sits paralyzed, her heart battering her ribs like a dying bird. Every fractured nerve screams this is a setup. What if this woman is just another piece on his chessboard? Come with me, we are about to find out what happens when a cornered animal must choose. Here is the tragic irony of survival. If Adrian is hunting Kyle, running only delays the slaughter. Deep fear drags her right back toward the open flames. We learn a bitter truth here. Sometimes the only way to escape a raging fire is to walk directly into the center of it. Driven by dread, Sarafina arrives at the cafe early. She wraps shaking hands around a black coffee, shrinking into the darkest corner. Her eyes fix on the door like a soldier awaiting an ambush. On the hour, Catherine steps into the frame. She is wrapped in the lethal armor of generational wealth, radiating the terrifying calm of a woman who treats psychological warfare as a mild hobby. Her sharp eyes lock onto Sarafina. She glides across the floor, slipping into the opposite chair without a sound. "Thank you for coming," she murmurs softly. And just like that, the surgeon prepares the scalpel for her first cut. We see a vital lesson in how true power operates. The most dangerous threats never need to raise their voices to command a room. The camera lingers on Sarafina's trembling hands. She whispers she should not have come. Catherine nods, her voice smooth as glass. She agrees it was a risk, but sitting here proves she is ready to wake up. With deliberate grace, Catherine slides a tablet across the table, illuminating the architecture of Adrian's obsession. He has built a psychological guillotine. A tap reveals legal complaints, surveillance photos, and hacked message logs. Bile rises in Sarafina's throat. She asks if he is suing Kyle. Catherine's unblinking gaze never wavers. "Not yet," she replies. But he is already poisoning the soil, contacting financial boards to suffocate Kyle's empire. The lesson here is grim. True monsters do not just attack you directly. They silently burn the very earth you stand on. Look at this piece by piece, shall we? We are watching pure psychological warfare unfold. Adrian is systematically burning the ground Kyle walks on, convincing financial backers that Kyle is just a ruthless billionaire crushing a helpless victim. Sarafina is completely paralyzed. The sheer coldness of the man she once loved leaves her gasping. She whispers that it is insanity. But Catherine does not even blink. Her voice is flat as she explains that this is exactly how Adrian operates. He selects you, builds the cage, and throws away the key. When Sarafina asks why Catherine would risk everything to help, the older woman's eyes darken with old grief. She spent 5 years bound to a ghost who made her question her own sanity. Here is a vital lesson about human connection. Those who survive deeply toxic bonds never forget the damage. They will always recognize their own scars on someone else. The brutal reality check arrives without warning. Catherine locks eyes with Serafina, offering a harsh confession. She only escaped Adrian because she was backed by endless family wealth. A single man cannot easily sink a dynasty. But Serafina is entirely alone. Catherine lays out the map with terrifying clarity. Without her intervention, Adrian will grind them into dust. When Serafina asks the price of this salvation, the answer is suffocating. She must offer up the ugly, unfiltered truth. Every secret she hid from Kyle must come out. Serafina panics, insisting she already confessed. But Catherine cuts straight through that delusion. She only fed Kyle a sanitized fairy tale. Adrian is currently framing her as an unstable liar. We must all face this life lesson eventually. If you refuse to drag your own deepest sins into the light, the people who want to destroy you will gladly write your history for you. The camera slowly pushes in as the emotional surgery begins. Catherine demands every broken piece of the wreckage. She wants the hidden affair, the layered lies, and the exact moment the betrayal took root. She needs that dirt to blow up Adrian's lawsuit before it even hits a courtroom. Serafina freezes. There is a specific horror in looking a stranger in the eye and confessing the worst things you have ever done. She whispers that if she speaks the truth now, Kyle will realize she lied. Catherine shatters that fragile illusion instantly. Kyle already knows. He already saw through the fake mask. You can see the crushing weight of that reality break down her final defense. She closes her eyes and begins to speak. It teaches us something profound. Honesty is not just about clearing your conscience. Sometimes, radical truth is the only weapon left to survive. The truth is, there are no perfect victims in this story. The lens lingers on Serafina as she sits beneath the harsh lights, her posture entirely defeated. She is finally spilling 8 months of suffocating secrets. The hidden affair with Marcus, the desperate, spinning lies. Catherine simply hits save on her silver voice recorder, her expression unreadable. Serafina's unhealed trauma handed Adrian the exact ammunition he needed. Now Catherine's counterattack is a freezing, brutal legal strike focused on his relentless stalking. It is hard to watch, but it leaves us with an undeniable lesson. The only way to truly strip a manipulator of their power is to look at your own ugly mistakes in the mirror. You have to own every single one of your flaws before someone else can weaponize them against you. Look at the absolute emotional wreckage left behind. Catherine paces the floor, desperately trying to force a logical strategy into place. But the camera shifts focus to Serafina, whose hands are shaking uncontrollably. She is drowning in pure, suffocating guilt. She dragged a completely innocent man into the middle of her personal war zone. Catherine gently suggests letting Kyle make his own choices, but Serafina understands the bitter reality. Kyle's emotional walls are already built 20 feet high. He threw her out because her betrayal cut him straight to the bone. They are two people bleeding out from old wounds. It is a painful scene that brings us to a harsh reality about relationships. When you completely shatter someone's trust with endless deception, you cannot just whisper a soft apology and expect the house to stay standing. The foundation is already reduced to dust. Catherine reads the shifting mood with surgical precision. Seeing the rising panic, she steps away, leaving Serafina completely alone in a crowded coffee shop. The endless chatter around her only makes the isolation feel heavier. Suddenly, her phone buzzes against the wooden table. It is an urgent message from Marcus. You can see the blood instantly drain from her face. A massive article just dropped online. It is a calculated, brutal corporate assassination aimed directly at Kyle, and everyone knows Adrian pulled the trigger. This is exactly how the real monsters play their sick games. They do not just strike their target, they burn down anyone standing too close. It leaves you with a deep lesson about control. True power has nothing to do with money. It is the terrifying, quiet ability to dismantle another person's life without ever leaving the comfort of your desk. You can watch her physical body shut down in real time. Her fingers tremble so violently that the phone slips from her grasp. Adrian has just dropped a fatal bomb on Kyle's career. Suffocating under the weight of her guilt, Sarafina bolts through the glass doors and throws herself into a cab. 20 agonizing minutes later, she bursts into Kyle's grand lobby. Marcus is stationed at the front desk, looking entirely drained. He gives her a look of heartbreaking pity before delivering the final, crushing blow. Kyle absolutely refuses to let her upstairs. She is a drowning woman, desperately trying to patch the very ship she sank. It reveals a quiet, tragic truth about human nature. Unchecked guilt is a dangerous driver. It will make you sprint across a city with burning tears in your eyes, but it rarely fixes the problem. It usually just leaves more wreckage behind. Stick with me, because this is where the tension becomes absolutely unbearable. Marcus decides to take a massive risk and radios up to the penthouse. The voice that echoes back through that tiny speaker is utterly dead. Kyle coldly threatens to fire Marcus on the spot if he breaks protocol. Defeated, Marcus simply lowers the radio. Sarafina completely falls apart, begging for one last chance to fix the waking nightmare she caused, and then the heavy brass elevator doors slowly slide open. Kyle steps into the lobby. The sight of him is a brutal shock. The man who always wore his power like iron armor is shattered. His expensive suit is wrinkled, and his eyes are bloodshot. It provides a sobering lesson for all of us. No matter how perfectly you construct your tough exterior, profound grief will burn it all to the ground in a single hour, leaving nothing but raw pain. The camera lingers heavily on Kyle's face. His dark eyes are entirely hollow, looking as though the spirit behind them has simply vanished. Sarafina reaches out toward him, her voice cracking as she desperately tries to apologize. But Kyle does not even flinch. He stands before her like a statue carved from ice. With an eerie calm, he dismantles her frantic excuses, reminding her that his entire existence depended on maintaining absolute control. He feels zero sympathy for her good intentions. Every single word he speaks acts like a precision scalpel, cutting her straight to the bone. It highlights a cruel, unchanging rule of human nature. When you pull the pin on a live grenade, your sudden regret does not stop the blast. Our choices are the only things that leave a permanent mark. An apology is often nothing more than empty wind blowing through the smoking ruins. Kyle methodically strips away her last shred of hope. He calmly lists the destruction she dragged right to his front door. He points out the looming legal nightmare, his ruined legacy, and the absolute murder of his ability to ever trust anyone again. She pleads for a chance at redemption, but he offers nothing except a terrifying blank stare. He reclaims his dominance by banishing her entirely. He issues a flat 60-second countdown for her to exit the building before he calls the police. As the heavy doors slide shut, sealing him away, Sarafina turns to stone. She gasps for air, physically buckling under the immense shock. It brings to a profound realization about grief. True heartbreak is rarely a loud, dramatic argument. The cruelest thing you can ever do to another person is to simply erase them. total silence will always hit much harder than a screaming match. Marcus gently guides her away from the elevators. She weakly fights his grip, acting like someone obsessively trying to glue together a vase they just smashed. When Marcus explicitly tells her it is over, her spirit finally breaks. She drags her exhausted body to a dark hotel room and stares blankly at the wall. And then, the true villain makes his entrance. Her phone screen lights up. It is Adrian. What follows is a terrifying masterclass in psychological abuse. He twists the knife into her fresh wounds, whispering that Kyle is only burning because she dared to defy him. He paints himself as the merciful savior, promising to fix the damage if she just submits. It reveals the defining reality of toxic people. They will set your entire life on fire and then patiently wait outside the blazing house just to sell you a single drop of water. Adrian's messages read exactly like a seasoned predator's playbook. He softens his tone, suddenly showering her with fake, poisonous affection. He cleverly frames her total surrender to him as a noble sacrifice. The camera holds tightly on Serafina's exhausted face, and you can visibly see her fragile mind rewiring itself. She is slipping into a state of emotional captivity right before our eyes. She actually starts believing that crawling back into his cage is the morally correct choice. She is prepared to trade her own soul just to buy Kyle's safety. A sudden phone call from Catherine shatters the dark trance, warning her about the media circus outside. But the venom is already in her veins. It leaves us with the saddest lesson of all. The iron bars of a psychological prison only lock permanently when the captive convinces themselves that surrendering is an act of heroism. Catherine shouts until her voice goes raw, begging her friend to fight back. She knows an offensive is the only path to survival. But Serafina is trapped in the twisted logic Adrian planted in her head. She honestly thinks that fighting means Kyle goes down and surrendering keeps him safe. Catherine tries to break the spell, warning that falling on her sword just leaves Kyle drowning in lifelong guilt. This is exactly how a narcissist plays the game, cornering you in a checkmate where any move breaks someone you care about. Watching Serafina curl up, convinced she ruins everything, is hard to stomach. It teaches us a painful truth. The absolute lowest point of suffering is that terrifying moment you decide the world would be better off if you just disappeared. Let us pause and take in the weight of this scene. She drops the phone and shrinks into the shadows. Sleep is impossible as her mind loops through dark scenarios, old memories rattling the cages in her head. Then, at 4:23 in the morning, we see a deliberate shift in her shoulders. Something inside her breaks in a good way. She decides she will not kneel to her captor and will not let an innocent person bleed for her mistakes. She maps out a dangerous gamble. True clarity almost never shows up when the sun is shining. The biggest choices we make happen in the dead of night, when we are simply too exhausted to keep lying to ourselves. It is a harsh but necessary truth. Sometimes hitting the absolute bottom is the only way to finally remember how to stand back up. Look closely at the opening frame of this morning. Thick fog clings to the pavement as she accepts that running is no longer an option. She stands on the edge of his corporate empire, shivering in the damp air. We see her exhausted eyes before the view cuts to a black luxury sedan pulling up at 6:47. Adrian steps out into the cold. The light hits his expensive suit, highlighting the calm of a man who feels zero regret for the lives he ruins. She watches his breath turn to vapor, her nerves completely shredded. It is a harsh reality to swallow, but one we all face eventually. The people who casually break us into pieces often sleep soundly, completely unbothered, while we spend our darkest hours trying to glue ourselves back together. We follow her through the massive doors, revealing how small she looks against the cold marble walls. Her footsteps echo like a ticking clock in an empty tomb. The desk receptionist offers a polite, entirely empty smile. But Sarafina knows how this script plays out. She understands Adrian and his massive ego. He sees her as a possession, meaning he will never pass up the chance to watch her beg. She speaks her name softly, paying her last shred of dignity like a toll fee. It is a terrifying position to be in, yet it holds a deeply important lesson for any uphill battle we face. Sometimes, to pick the lock on a fortress that seems impossible to breach, you must hand the tyrant exactly what he wants, playing the helpless pawn just long enough to finally slip inside his walls. Notice the subtle shift in the air. The second the receptionist hears her name, the corporate mask drops, replaced by a blend of quiet pity and dark curiosity. Sarafina is practically a walking ghost here. The elevator doors slide shut, locking her in a box shooting to the 48th floor. Bright lights carve harsh shadows into her face. Looking at her shattered reflection, a desperate plan takes shape. If you want to calm a predator, you have to look exactly like a wounded animal. She lets her shoulders drop, sinking completely into the role of a defeated girl. This reveals a very painful truth about survival. Sometimes the most brilliant acts of deception demand a brutal price, forcing you to break your own spirit just to make the illusion entirely convincing. Picture the setup of this confrontation. Huge windows wrap an empty room built specifically to make visitors feel tiny. As Sarafina steps inside, the oxygen seems to vanish. Adrian puts his phone down, turning with a smile that holds absolutely zero warmth. He watches like a hawk, seeing a tired bird fly right back into a snare. He casually points out how exhausted she looks. When she asks him to drop the vicious lawsuit, destroying Kyle, Adrian just tilts his head. He asks why he would ever do a favor like that, waiting for her to offer up her own freedom in exchange. It is a chilling look at human nature. The most destructive manipulation in life never raises its voice or throws a punch. It wears an expensive suit and simply waits for you to defeat yourself. We have to brace ourselves because the cruelty here is suffocating. Adrian demands a confession for every betrayal she supposedly committed. We see her hands shaking, knuckles white as she grips her coat. Crushed by the pressure, she starts reciting the fake sins he invented. She actually asks for forgiveness for breaking his trust, crying softly. This is the absolute peak of a trauma bond. When tearing us to shreds, he steps close as gives her a patronizing pat on the back. He whispers about how hard that must have been, soaking up her humiliation. It leaves us with a grim reality to carry forward. The ultimate win for a truly toxic person is not just knocking you down, but making you apologize for getting your blood on their floor. This is the breaking point of her surrender. Sarafina offers to erase herself from the picture, promising to disappear so Kyle can survive. For a split second, real confusion crosses Adrian's face. He cannot understand why she would set herself on fire to keep someone else warm. She snaps back through heavy tears, saying Kyle does not deserve to be destroyed by their mess. Adrian turns his back, staring at the city below like a bored king. He does not even look at her when he asks the fatal question. Does she love Kyle? This perfectly highlights the tragedy of a self-obsessed mind. They are entirely blind to selfless care. If you show them a piece of genuine human decency, they will just weaponize it, turning your good heart into a brand new excuse to hurt the people around you. That one question hits her like a punch to the chest. The view pushes in close on Sarafina, freezing on her panicked silence. To Adrian, this is just a math problem about power and control. He paces the floor, his voice dropping into a quieter rhythm as he compares his 2 years of ownership against her short weeks of freedom. He digs into her head, desperate to figure out what Kyle has that he does not. Inside her mind, she is screaming the answer. Kyle never locked her inside a pretty cage and called it love, but the heavy chains of trauma keep her mouth shut. It highlights one of the hardest parts of being human. Sometimes we swallow the honest truth, not because we doubt what we know, but because saying it out loud will cost us the very last things we have left to lose. Let us look at this brutal chessboard together. Sarafina knows she pulled an innocent man into a living nightmare. When she whispers that Kyle made her feel safe, a muscle twitches in Adrian's face, revealing his bruised ego. He argues that watching her every move was the highest protection. She points out that actual love does not need a tracker, but Adrian is a master of mental games. Smiling coldly, he flips the narrative, using her past secrets to ask what real betrayal looks like. It is a perfectly aimed strike at her deepest guilt. You see the fight drain from her eyes as she surrenders to protect Kyle. We all make mistakes, but a true manipulator collects your bad choices like coins, keeping them ready to spend the exact second you try to walk away. Notice how he uses the room to crush her. Adrian picks up a massive 27-page legal document and lets it drop onto the glass desk. The thud echoes like a gunshot. That stack of paper is a weapon pointed right at Kyle's future. When she pleads with him to stop the attack, the trap closes. He leans in, saying the only way to save Kyle is to step back into her cage, just so Adrian can pretend his sick obsession is romance. He is treating a hostage situation like a love story. Her voice shakes as she calls him insane, which is entirely accurate. But that is the cruelest joke of this situation. Seeing the madness clearly does not automatically rescue you. Knowing exactly how damaged a toxic person is will never be enough to block the devastating hits they can still land. This is where reality violently warps. Adrian smoothly flips the script, painting himself as the tragic hero. He coldly notes that Kyle already walked away, setting himself up as the only safe harbor she has left. It is a dark, masterful assassination tactic. As Sarafina backs toward the door, his voice flattens into a dead, robotic tone. He lists exactly how he plans to destroy a 15-year career, making sure she knows the ruin will be on her hands. He is pitching her captivity as a heroic sacrifice. It is a tragedy we see play out all the time. The villain makes you believe you are responsible for the fire they just lit. The hardest life lesson to swallow is realizing you cannot save everyone, especially when the game was rigged before you even sat down at the table. The frame tightens on a suffocating climax as we watch a spirit break in real time. Adrian offers a poisoned apple of false freedom, casually promising to loosen his surveillance. When Sarafina breathes out that she cannot trust him, he does not yell. He simply gestures toward his legal hounds, a corporate machine built to tear Kyle apart. Her physical body just gives up. You can almost hear her lungs begging for air as she stares into his empty eyes. He would destroy an innocent man without missing a single heartbeat. Her final spark of defiance turns to dust. She asks, her voice completely broken, how many years she must endure this living cage. It leaves us with a heavy truth. Sometimes the absolute bravest thing a person can do is drop their weapon, just to keep the innocent out of a hopeless crossfire. Pay attention to the quiet violence here. Adrian orders her to stay until she remembers why she loved him, erasing the line between a romantic partner and a prison warden. If the conditioning fails, he casually mentions they will figure it out. He never plans to unlock the gate. She looks at this hollow man who built a cage out of twisted affection, sickened that he genuinely believes his own dark fairy tale. She manages to buy a 24-hour head start. Stumbling out into the freezing wind, her adrenaline supply hits zero. She collapses onto a frosted park bench, shaking as she buries her face in her hands. It leaves us with a bitter reality to accept. There are agonizing days in this life where simply surviving looks exactly like absolute, crushing defeat. The camera pushes in on Sarafina, framing the harsh shadows across her exhausted face. We are watching a soul trapped in a corner with no exit. She must either let her mind be torn to shreds or watch an innocent man take the fall for her past. Then, the ring of her phone shatters the silence. It is Catherine Mercer, and her voice holds zero warmth, only cold steel. Catherine delivers a truth that cuts to the bone. You do not negotiate with a toxic manipulator. They only use your desperate words to reload their own weapon. When Sarafina tearfully confesses the blackmail, the line falls dead quiet. Catherine absolutely refuses to let her play the helpless victim. The lesson here is simple but tough. You cannot hide from the monsters in your life. You have to drag them out into the blinding daylight. Notice how the lighting grows colder as you and I watch this brutal fight for her soul. Stockholm Syndrome whispers venom in Sarafina's ear, begging her to take the bullets just to keep Duval safe. But Catherine methodically strips away that toxic martyr complex, peeling it back piece by piece. She hits Sarafina with a heavy reality check. Duval is a grown man who knew the risks from day one. Treating him like a helpless child is an insult to his courage. Catherine pokes right at Sarafina's lingering pride, asking if she is truly that weak. The papers are signed. She just has to pick up the sword. The hardest lesson we ever learn is this. Truly trusting someone means letting them carry the weight of their own brave choices, even when it absolutely terrifies you. The mental dam shatters, breaking the scene into a rapid, gut-wrenching montage. We see quiet flashes of her feeling safe with Duval, violently crashing into the ugly truth of her own tangled lies. Her shoulders physically drop as she faces a bitter fact. Duval does not owe her a single ounce of forgiveness. But the human will to survive is a stubborn thing. She owes it to herself to die standing on her feet, not begging on her knees. She gives the green light, her voice barely a whisper. 3 hours later, the bomb goes off. The private case file hits the internet, exposing the digital stalking and the horror stories of past victims. The lesson is undeniable. The truth always finds a way out, violently ripping open the darkest doors we try to keep locked shut. Let's look at this piece by piece, shall we? The fallout plays out in absolute chaos. Wealthy executives scramble to run from the scandal, while media sharks smell fresh blood in the water. Catherine coldly reads off the damage report, but the camera stays glued to Sarafina's trembling hands. She is entirely stuck on one detail. She practically begs to know how Duval reacted, desperate to measure the depth of his hatred. Catherine delivers a line that rips the heart right out of the frame. Duval does not hate her. He hates the fact that he still cares about her. It teaches us a brutal life lesson. Trauma never just burns the victim. It scorches everyone standing nearby. Meanwhile, by 6 p.m., Adrian is already staging a perfectly fake press event to save his own skin. Stick with me here, because we need to watch this perfectly sick for performance together. Adrian steps up to the flashing cameras, acting like a wounded, tragic hero who only ever wanted to help. The bright lighting catches his teary eyes as he takes his own massive cruelty and attempts to sell it as deep protective love for a broken woman. When reporters press him about the other victims, he pulls the oldest trick in the playbook. He smoothly denies their reality. He offers a totally hollow apology, stating he is just sorry they misunderstood his kindness. It is a terrifying magic trick happening in real time. The lesson is chilling, but totally necessary to hear. Some people feel absolutely nothing for the lives they ruin, forever trapped in a cold cage of their own flawless illusions. Focus on the deep contrast built into this sequence. We see Adrian at the microphone, lying through his teeth with an eerie, calm smile. Then we cut to Sarafina, watching him on a glowing screen in a dark room. You can literally see the color drain from her face, her breathing turning shallow as her body enters full panic mode. Her phone vibrates. It is Kyle. She answers, her fingers shaking like autumn leaves. His voice on the other end is totally dead, ice cold. He demands to know why she dropped a legal bomb without giving him a warning first. She honestly thought she was being brave. But life teaches us a hard truth right here. Good intentions do not fix broken systems. She just took their private nightmare and threw it to the wolves, making everything 1,000 times worse. Physically painful to watch this scene unfold. Sarafina genuinely believes she has to throw herself on the train tracks to save the man trying to rescue her. Tears of exhaustion stream down her face as she tells Kyle she only wanted to keep him safe from the blast. But Kyle completely rejects this tragic savior game. The camera captures his hardened jaw as he lays out the grim reality of what comes next. Adrian has expensive, ruthless lawyers ready to tear her mind apart in front of the world. They will paint her as a crazy, bitter ex-out for a quick payday. Here is the brutal lesson we all must swallow. In the unforgiving court of public opinion, the actual truth rarely matters at all. A skilled abuser will simply flip the script, leaving the true victim looking like the cold villain. Notice how the shadows physically close in around her. This is how a mastermind breaks you down until you cannot even pull a breath into your lungs. Sarafina is sobbing openly, begging to know what else she could have possibly done. That, she confesses, her voice cracking, that she offered to go right back to Adrian just to make the nightmare stop for everyone. It is a devastating visual, the broken bird begging to return to her dirty cage. Kyle hears this, and his voice drops to a dead whisper. He tells her he already knows. He refuses to let her play the willing sacrifice anymore. She is choking on her own tears, apologizing over and over. He cuts her off sharply. The lesson here is all about survival. You cannot cry your way out of a dirty war. You have to stand up, plant your feet, and fight back. Step back and admire the twisted architecture of Adrian's trap. He is painting Sarafina as the evil mastermind and Kyle as the foolish pawn. Kyle knows they only have one desperate shot left in the chamber. If they do not move forward as a unified front, they will both lose everything. He is drained, looking like a soldier, tired of fighting shadows. He draws a harsh line in the sand. No more half-truths, no more hiding behind gentle lies to spare his feelings. He demands the entire ugly reality. Sarafina closes her swollen eyes, looking totally defeated. Then, Kyle asks the one heavy question that shatters the room. Did she ever actually love Adrian? She wants to lie to save her dignity, but the lesson is absolute. True healing demands brutal honesty. She takes a breath, finally breaks down, and whispers yes. The camera stays tight on her face as she tries to untangle the mess inside her head. She desperately explains that the love was real only before he morphed into a monster. She admits her romance with Marcus Chen was never genuine love, just a panicked attempt to run away. But when Kyle asks where he fits into her fractured heart, the silence in the room becomes deafening. She freezes, honestly, admitting her brain is too broken to even recognize love right now. Kyle takes that emotional hit without a blink. He delivers the cold facts. Adrian just won the crowd with fake tears. Their only remaining weapon is absolute, unprotected honesty. The lesson here is terrifying but true. Sometimes the only way to beat a giant lie is to expose every single one of your own painful mistakes to the light. The cinematic tension builds as they prepare a trap for the very next afternoon. It will be a live press conference. She, Kyle, and Catherine will stand under unforgiving lights, exposing their deepest psychological scars to millions of strangers. Sarafina sits motionless in a dim room, convinced she's about to crack under the emotional weight. But Kyle delivers a cold, necessary wake-up call. If she hides now, Adrian will write the script of her life forever. The line goes dead, leaving her staring at her fractured reflection. The life lesson here is profound. You must absolutely own your story, or someone else will inevitably weaponize it against you. By early afternoon, she steps into a plain hotel lobby, wearing a simple suit like a modern set of armor. The camera tracks them down a sterile corridor, building a heavy sense of dread. Catherine stops her right outside the doors, looking deep into her eyes to search for any crack in her resolve. Sarafina does not even attempt to hide her trembling hands, admitting she is completely terrified. Catherine gives a slow nod, reminding her that fear is the only sane reaction to the fire she is about to walk into. They push the doors open. Kyle is waiting by the window, bathed in cold daylight, looking like a man preparing for a brutal street fight. They exchange a silent stare, recognizing the profound psychological damage they share. The lesson here is quiet but vital. True courage is not the absence of fear, but choosing to walk directly into the roaring flames anyway. For one cinematic second, the rigid lines of Kyle's face actually soften. He does not completely forgive her bitter betrayal, but you can see in his eyes that he finally understands the sheer depth of her trauma. Then the heavy double doors swing open. A hungry wave of reporters pushes forward. Camera flashes violently, lighting up the stark room. Catherine strides up to the microphones first, immediately setting the ground rules. She warns the crowd that this is not a court of law, but three battered people revealing the truth of a toxic nightmare. Kyle then takes the podium. He radiates a raw, unbending power, silencing the entire room in an instant. The lesson here is commanding. When you finally stop hiding your deep scars, you strip the monster of its remaining power. The camera lingers on Kyle, breaking down the timeline like a relentless machine. Under the blinding flashbulbs, he details how he realized a stalker was hunting his people. He cornered the puppet master, looked Adrian straight in the eye, and ripped his secret into the harsh light. Kyle does not blink. His voice is an unyielding anchor, showing zero regrets about destroying a psychological bully. But then the armor cracks. He confesses his fatal error. He was completely blind to their venomous history, and rushing in to play the savior only makes the blood spill faster. He steps back into the shadows. Sarafina steps into the light, trembling as cameras lock onto her pale face. The truest life lesson is that every savior eventually meets a tragedy they simply cannot fix. Let us pause right here and really study this frame. You and I can see Sarafina's knuckles turning bone white, digging into the heavy wood of the podium to anchor her shattered reality. She drags the last 2 years with Adrian into the brutal light, the tracking, the suffocating isolation, the slow erosion of her sanity. But then the tragic victim facade shatters. She stares directly into the lenses and confesses that she cheated. She lied first. It is a suffocating irony. She handed Adrian a single spark, and he used it to burn their world to ash. The simple truth you have to remember in life is this: your own mistakes never give another human being the right to utterly destroy you. But standing in the light and owning those sins, that takes a staggering kind of bravery. This is exactly where the narrative fractures. We are watching two broken souls who completely ruined one another. Sarafina is not begging the audience for a halo. She owns every step of their toxic dance, but she draws a heavy line in the sand. Yes, she lied. But Adrian mutating into a digital phantom to hunt her every move, that is a profound crime. She refuses the martyr role and turns her fragile frame toward Kyle. Her apology to him is so stripped of defense, so agonizingly raw, it feels like a physical blow. She dragged an innocent man into her private hell. The reporters smell blood shouting over one another, but she stands firm in the chaos. The lesson here is undeniable. Facing the absolute worst of yourself without any armor is the only true way out of the dark. Catherine cuts through the room like a shark, snapping the media circus shut. Kyle seizes Sarafina, and they vanish out a side door before the mob can tear them apart. Picture them in a dimly lit hotel suite just above the frenzy. The silence is suffocating. Catherine paces, watching the digital world erupt. Sarafina just tossed a live grenade into Adrian's pristine public image. Kyle dismisses Catherine into the hall. Left alone, he stares through the cold window at the blurred city lights. He turns to Sarafina, chest heaving with adrenaline, and admits he cannot tell if she is profoundly brave or entirely foolish. A stark life lesson emerges here. True courage almost always looks exactly like sheer stupidity to everyone standing safely on the sidelines. The tension in the suite shifts into something fragile. Healing only begins the exact second the lying stops. Sarafina absorbs his heavy judgment and softly asks what comes next. Kyle's voice drops an octave. He vows that if Adrian tries to twist this narrative, he will unleash total destruction. Shadows play across her face, masking her profound confusion. Why would a powerful man gamble his entire empire for a shattered woman? Kyle steps into her space, closing the physical gap. He looks deeply into her eyes and says he sees someone bleeding out just to tell the truth. Her voice breaks as she whispers she does not deserve to be saved. Kyle offers her absolute grace anyway. The most powerful life lesson you can learn is finding that quiet strength to simply allow yourself to be forgiven. Stick with me, because we need to pause the film at this exact frame. This is the moment Kyle's universe shatters. His phone vibrates. It is his head of security. Watch the blood vanish from Kyle's face. He speaks only 3 clipped phrases. When? How bad? Lock it down. He ends the call, and the dark shift in his posture makes Sarafina's stomach drop. Kyle slowly looks at her, his eyes resembling dead winter ice. Someone just firebombed his flagship restaurant. His loyal people are bleeding. The flames are still climbing. He does not even need to speak the name. They know Adrian escalated this from a public relations war to physical terror. The chilling life lesson is absolute. A true narcissist will gladly burn down the entire world before they accept defeat. They pull up to the police barricades 23 minutes later. The visual is an absolute Greek tragedy. Thick, suffocating columns of black smoke bleed from the second-floor windows. 15 years of Kyle's identity are turning to gray ash under the flashing sirens. Look closely at his face. He completely dissociates, retreating into a cold, untouchable fortress within his mind. An exhausted fire chief approaches, wiping toxic soot from his brow, confirming it was a rapid chemical blaze. Kyle asks for the casualty count in a hollow metallic monotone. 2 servers, 1 cook, severe burns. The life lesson hidden in these ashes is brutally dark. When the innocent people you lead are forced to bleed in your private war, the sheer weight of that guilt will eat you alive. The chief reveals the arsonist slipped away 60 seconds before the detonation. Watch the jagged flecks of Kyle's jaw in the smoky light. It is the only physical crack, betraying the murderous rage boiling beneath his skin. The attacker moved with the calculated precision of a ghost. This was a paid mercenary. Kyle offers the chief a hollow nod and pivots away. Sarafina watches his silhouette, physically trembling. Her twisted trauma bond with Adrian tells her exactly what kind of hell comes next. They slide back into the car, and the heavy silence becomes a chokehold. Kyle grips the steering wheel until his knuckles turn bone white. The hard life lesson here is written in stone. You can never negotiate peace with a monster who finds genuine joy in watching you bleed. We are observing a fractured man standing on the edge of a psychological cliff. Knowing they are prey, Kyle abandons his main estate and drives deep into the woods to a hidden property in Connecticut. Past midnight, he kills the engine. He sits in its black car, paralyzed by the shadows. Sarafina shatters the quiet. She begins to weep, crushed by the thought that 3 innocent souls are in a hospital because of her existence. It is pure survivor's guilt, but those words snap Kyle out of his trance. He fiercely rejects her confession. Turning to face her in the gloom, his voice is pure iron. Adrian alone struck that match. The lesson is vital for anyone carrying invisible scars. Never absorb the blame for the cruel choices another human being willingly makes. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Kyle dismantling Sarafina's guilt is a tragic masterclass in breaking a trauma loop. He cuts straight through her tears. She did not pour the gasoline, and she did not pay a mercenary to reduce his legacy to ash. Adrian alone committed this atrocity, and Adrian will pay. Desperate, Sarafina begs to know his plan, but Kyle erects a solid wall of ice. He drifts into the shadowy house, pours a heavy measure of dark liquor, and stands by the counter, a statue lost in thought. He drinks in absolute silence while she watches him fade. He orders her to sleep, his voice so thick with exhaustion it feels like a physical wound. He must construct this war alone. Life holds a bitter irony. Sometimes, the people trying the hardest to protect us are the exact ones pushing us the farthest away. Let us step into the bleak aftermath together. Sarafina finally surrenders to the heavy weight of nervous exhaustion. When she wakes to the cold, gray bleed of morning light and the bitter scent of dark coffee, she finds Kyle frozen in the exact same spot. He has not shed his ruined suit or slept a single second. When she softly questions his state, his response is completely hollow. Then, he drops a confession that reframes his entire existence. He spent the long night agonizing over his dead sister, Elena. She is a phantom he never speaks of. Staring down into his mug, he whispers she was 2 years younger, radiating a bright light he never bothered to praise while she was still breathing. The most devastating life lesson you will ever learn is simply this: showering someone with appreciation only after they are gone will never bring them back to you. The camera slowly pushes in as Kyle finally unlocks the rusted vault of his childhood. His father was a terrifying monster who weaponized love. He was a psychological butcher, breaking a young mind while constantly convincing his son He was his only shield against the world. Kyle locks eyes with Sarafina, asking if that twisted script sounds familiar. The dark parallel to Adrian is chilling. By the time she was 17, his sister Elena was a hollow ghost wandering through her own home. Kyle confesses his most agonizing failure. He was so consumed with surviving their father's wrath that he never noticed his little sister dying internally. She overdosed at 19 in what they conveniently called a tragic accident. The darkest life lesson is terrifyingly real. True monsters do not hide under the bed. They sit right at the dinner table and convince you they are family. Sarafina reaches out to soothe his trembling shoulders, but Kyle deflects her touch like a tired fighter blocking a heavy blow. He claims he has had 2 decades to process the grief, but the ancient guilt is clearly eating him alive. He looks right through her and confesses his unforgivable sin. He escaped that venomous house and left his little sister behind in the absolute dark. He fed himself the convenient lie that she was tough enough to survive the beast alone. Sarafina pleads that he was only a child, but he violently rejects the empty excuse. He knew abandoning her was a death sentence, and he walked away anyway. His voice cracks as the terrifying realization hits him. He almost abandoned Sarafina to the exact same fate. The final life lesson is undeniable. If you refuse to face the demons of your past, you are doomed to inflict them on the people you love. You and I should hold on this frame for a second. The lighting here is stark, cutting sharply across Kyle's face as he systematically tears his own soul apart. His shoulders are caved, his hands trembling. I chose my own survival over yours, he confesses, his voice cracking like dry winter wood. It hits Sarafina like a physical blow to the chest, but she refuses to let the camera linger on his suffocating guilt. She steps right into his space, the cold distance between them vanishing entirely. She reminds him that both she and his sister were just lying to survive a world that gave them zero control. Your sister made her own tragic choice, she whispers. But you did not make it for her. It is a brutal but beautiful truth. We simply cannot carry the heavy weight of the fatal choices that belonged entirely to someone else. She takes that exact same logic and throws it right back at their current nightmare. The room is dead quiet. Adrian choosing to burn down your life is not on my shoulders, she tells him. We cannot micromanage the destructive impulses of deeply broken people. Kyle grips the cold marble counter so hard his knuckles drain of blood. Then what can we actually control? He demands into the silence. Sarafina gives him a masterclass in resilience right then and there. We only control how we respond, she says, and whether we let their shattered minds break our own. There is a heavy, suffocating pause. When Kyle finally speaks, his tone is terrifyingly flat. I am going to destroy him. He vows to wipe out Adrian entirely. The lesson is dark, but incredibly true. The only way to truly protect your hard-earned peace is to go to absolute war. You and I need to look very closely at this exact frame, because we are watching the total death of Kyle's restraint. Sarafina feels the temperature in the room turn to pure ice. She warns him that attacking now will just look like bitter, reckless revenge. But Kyle is completely gone. Adrian burned his sanctuary, and that is a permanent line drawn in the sand. Kyle's eyes hold a dead, lethal focus that chills the blood. He admits he was playing defense for months, but those polite rules are officially dead. He grabs his phone, demanding every single piece of dirt on Adrian, the money, the hidden emails, the surveillance files. He verbally accepts all the legal risks without blinking once. The hunt is officially on. The lesson here is terrifying. Push a patient man way too far, and you will eventually beg for the regulated version of him you used to hate. He drops the heavy phone on the counter and turns to her. The shadows in the quiet room seem to lengthen as he issues a direct order. Pack up and go stay with Catherine. He desperately wants to build a thick wall between her and the moral rot he is about to step in. I am about to do some very unethical things, he warns. But Sarafina just plants her feet firmly into the floorboards. She refuses to run away, calling out his massive hypocrisy right to his face. You just agonized over abandoning people, and now you want me to abandon you? Not happening. He tries to argue. This is not her fight. She fires back with pure venom. She went to the press and broke his lies. She is not hiding now. The lesson is completely undeniable. You cannot shield someone from a chaotic storm they willingly helped you summon. You just have to stand in the freezing rain together. The camera tightens on Kyle's exhausted face, and you can literally see his towering mental walls collapsing. He gives her one last, brutally honest warning. If you stay, you will see my absolute baseline, he says, his voice thick with heavy dread, the hidden parts that are neither safe nor polite. Sarafina tells him his darkness does not scare her. Maybe it should, he mutters under his breath. Her response holds the pure, heavy exhaustion of a lifelong victim. I have been terrified my whole life, she breathes out, and I am finally done running. Kyle gives a single slow nod, accepting their mutual descent into the mud. What happens next is 48 hours of pure, surgical destruction. The simple truth here is profound. Real loyalty is not standing by someone when they are perfect. It is holding their hand when they show you the darkest parts of their soul. The trap finally snaps completely shut. Agents swarm Adrian's headquarters under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. You and I are watching the monitor alongside them, seeing this arrogant narcissist completely fall apart in real time. Adrian is dragged out in heavy handcuffs, looking incredibly small and entirely broken. The terrifying predator is now just a powerless guy. But look closely at Sarafina. There is absolutely no cheering, just massive, soul-crushing exhaustion settling deep into her bones. Kyle stares blankly at the glowing screen. The takedown is entirely complete, yet he delivers the bitterest line of the film. I just spent 3 weeks turning into the exact ruthless monster I swore I would never be. The lesson here is incredibly steep. When you go to war against a toxic force, you have to be very careful not to grow your own claws in the process. Let us pause and look deeply at the real toll of revenge. The lighting in the room is dim, perfectly matching the heavy, suffocating mood. Sarafina stares at Kyle, the man who willingly burned down his own world to protect her, and asks a terrifying question. Did you actually enjoy destroying him? Kyle just looks back at her. His awful silence is the darkest answer possible. This is not a triumphant victory with cheering crowds. It is raw survival, and the main casualties are their own moral boundaries. A week later, Catherine calls with a sudden plea deal. Adrian will take 5 to 7 years in federal prison and drop his fake lawsuits. Sarafina sits on the edge of the unmade bed, letting the cold reality sink into her skin. The life lesson here is very tough to swallow. Sometimes true survival does not mean a clean, happy ending. It just means putting the weapon down. We need to unpack the stark difference between winning in court and actually moving on. Sarafina asks about the stalking charges, her voice tight with leftover fear. The lawyer is brutally practical. Going to a public trial would waste millions of dollars and drain years of her life. Then comes the ultimate defining question. Do you want justice, revenge, or closure? Justice happens in a cold, sterile courtroom. Revenge is wanting the monster to bleed out on the floor, but closure is the quiet, incredibly difficult act of simply walking away. The life lesson is staring us right in the face. You simply cannot heal if you refuse to let go of the blade that cut you. Serafina pictures Adrian in a federal cell, absolutely convinced that he is the real victim. She decides to let him stay trapped in that pathetic, lonely delusion forever. She is finally free. Let us examine the heartbreaking reality of this moment together. Serafina stands there with a trembling voice, admitting the truth that keeps her chained. She is caught in a trauma bond, desperate for the man who broke her to suddenly grow a conscience. Catherine delivers a crushing dose of reality. No courtroom can mandate human empathy. Adrian is a hollow shell, and his brokenness is no longer her burden. Watch her face as that truth finally sinks in. You can almost feel the heavy chains shattering as she accepts the plea deal. The exhausting adrenaline of survival begins to fade. True peace only arrives when you stop starving for an apology from someone incapable of giving one. She wanders into the kitchen, finding Kyle quietly cooking, a simple anchor of real, safe care. Notice how the energy entirely shifts in this quiet space. She whispers that the deal is officially done. Kyle does not celebrate, he just keeps chopping garlic. His steady hands provide a calm anchor for her mind. He simply asks if she is okay with the outcome, making sure the choice was entirely hers. She reminds him of the dark lengths he went to protect her, rather than fueling a bitter revenge tour. Kyle looks up, his eyes empty of the toxic control she expects from men. Her quiet peace of mind is the only victory he cares about. She leans against the counter, admitting she is just unbelievably tired of the war. Healing is rarely a loud, triumphant shout from a mountaintop. Usually, it is just the exhausted, quiet sigh of a battered soldier finally taking off their heavy armor. What happens when the villain is finally gone? The hardest part begins figuring out how to be normal again. Kyle openly admits he has no clue how to do that, but he is willing to learn. They sit across the table, awkwardly trying to act like regular humans. It is a fragile comfort, like stacking a house of cards next to a bomb crater. You and I see this pattern constantly with severe trauma. The human brain naturally rejects sudden peace because the silence feels like a trap. Later, they sit on opposite ends of the couch, maintaining a respectful gap. Serafina finally breaks the heavy silence, asking the question that haunts her. Why did he step into the fire for her? The truth is profound. Sometimes, learning how to simply exist in a quiet room is infinitely harder than surviving a violent war. Kyle slowly swirls the wine in his glass. The dim lighting catches a heavy sorrow in his eyes. He tells her she reminded him of his sister, not her face, but the guarded way she moved. He recognized the tragic posture of someone who has been broken, making themselves physically tiny just to survive. But watch the crucial pivot he makes here. He did not ask her to stick around because a helpless victim. He stayed because she was fiercely fighting back. Serafina tries to brush it off, claiming his money saved her. He shuts that down instantly. Resources are absolutely useless if you do not have a spine. True strength is clawing your own way out of the wreckage. Someone else might hold a flashlight in the dark, but you always have to do the climbing yourself. Let us step into this frame together, shall we? Watch the shift in lighting as Kyle does the unthinkable in their dark world. He offers Serafina a perfectly blank slate. His hands rest steady. Palms open a quiet promise of zero expectations. If they only ever exist as friends, he murmurs, that is enough. The rigid tension in her shoulders finally collapses. Real love never forces a choice through fear. The story cuts forward 3 months in a single breath. We follow her through a tiny, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn. No Adrian. No endless psychological warfare. Across the river, Kyle silently lays fresh bricks over the burned ashes of his old restaurant. The reality here is as undeniable as gravity itself. You simply cannot heal your soul in the exact same room that broke you. The rhythm of their lives settles into peaceful tones. Coffee on Wednesday mornings, quiet dinners on Sundays, a safe sanctuary. But fate is a cruel director. On a cold Tuesday, the camera focuses on an envelope stamped from the state penitentiary. Her breath catches Adrian. The paper trembles violently in her hands as she reads his shattered confession. Locked away with the violent men he used to mock, his colossal ego has finally cracked. A psychiatrist has diagnosed his narcissism, holding a mirror up to the monster beneath his polished skin. It is the total ruin of his carefully constructed illusion. The heavy truth of this tragedy is clear. The most agonizing prison is never made of cold iron bars. It is the inescapable horror of finally seeing yourself for exactly who you are. The camera pushes in tight on the ink of that trembling page. Adrian lays out a staggering confession. He admits, in tragic prose, that he blurred the line between protecting a lover and keeping a hostage. He confesses to sabotaging her spirit while playing the savior. Serafina sits by the frosted window, reading the cursive 3 agonizing times. The scene is ice cold, matching the chilling sincerity of his words. But here is the ultimate danger of a caged narcissist. They always write like tormented poets. The words bleed beautifully on paper, yet a few therapy sessions cannot wash away a lifetime of venom. This letter is just calculated manipulation disguised as regret. The lesson here is vital. Never mistake a tear-jerking, poetic apology for the heavy, silent work of actual behavior change. She folds the paper with brutal finality, sliding it into a dark drawer. She is not writing back. In this dark story, this quiet action is a monumental victory. His sudden epiphany does not erase her scars. On Sunday evening, the diner light catches the letter as she slides it to Kyle. His jaw tightens, but his voice remains soft when he asks where her head is at. She is desperate to believe Adrian's remorse is real, terrified it is an illusion. Kyle's response strikes like a hammer. He tells her both realities exist at once. The man who broke you can weep with genuine sorrow today, and still be the monster who destroys your life tomorrow. A broken heart does not mean a fixed soul. The lesson is clear. Feeling sick about your sins is entirely different from having the spine to change them. Serafina absorbs his words, shadows clinging to her face. She asks the agonizing question every survivor whispers into the dark, will he actually change? Kyle calmly replies that he might try. But that battle is no longer hers to watch. We must remember this harsh truth. You are never assigned to be the parole officer for the phantom who ruined you. Your only obligation is dragging yourself out of the wreckage. Outside, snow drifts over the city. Her eyes finally detach from her ghost and lock onto the steady man across the booth. She tells him she is ready to figure them out. Kyle visibly braces, as if preparing for a physical blow. The lesson is absolute. You stop owing your tragic past a single breath the moment you claim your own future. She looks at the man who became her anchor, delivering the most beautiful line of her life. She tells him she does not need him to survive anymore. With the desperation gone, choosing to stay is an act of free will, not a frantic grab for a life raft. The stoic mask Kyle wears for the world shatters, exposing a raw, terrified hope. He barely breathes, asking if she is truly making that choice. Her hand reaches across the table, gripping his, A definitive yes. The bitter winter begins to thaw. She soon spins her trauma into armor, standing tall to defend her university thesis. They do not rush the next chapter. True freedom, we learn, is laying the bricks of your life with patience, ensuring your new foundation can finally bear the weight of your happiness. The camera glides alongside them on a crisp afternoon in Central Park, but a tragedy always demands an encore. Her phone vibrates. The monster is securing early parole. Sarafina freezes, color draining from her face. Kyle's posture shifts in a flash. The dormant predator wakes up, his jaw setting like granite. He leans in, voice dangerously low, offering to permanently erase the problem. She cuts him off with absolute ice. No, he served his time, and Kyle's bristles, demanding to know what happens if the shadow returns. Her answer is cinematic perfection. She will simply make a call and let the concrete cage swallow Adrian again. She is done running. The psychological war ends the exact second you look your deepest fear in the eye and refuse to play the helpless prey. I want you and I to examine the framing of this moment. Months of agonizing psychological labor have rewired her soul. She looks at Kyle, a ruthless man who should terrify her, and feels zero fear. Kyle, a man who built an empire on control, sees a woman who bows to no one. He softly murmurs how profoundly proud he is. She is no longer shrinking into the shadows or begging him to be her violent shield. A tear escapes as she whispers she owes him her life. He rejects that debt instantly, placing the crown firmly back on her head. He swears she would have clawed her way to the surface, with or without him. It is a stunning display of grace. The ultimate lesson is clear. True recovery is never about finding a terrifying guardian to save you. It is unearthing the brutal strength to save yourself. Feel the heavy, cinematic weight pulling at this exact scene. This man ripped apart a criminal underworld just to ensure she could breathe, yet he managed to love her without ever locking the cage. When she finally confesses her feelings, he goes entirely still, reminding her that a rescued life does not owe a debt of romance. But Sarafina smiles through the shadows. She understands the massive difference between loving a man and desperately needing him to survive. He pulls her in for a slow, deliberate kiss, forming a silent treaty between two equals. As the story jumps forward a full year, we see her standing in that same kitchen, bathed in silver moonlight. The lesson here is timeless. A love chosen freely in the calm will always outlast an affection built in the chaos of survival. Notice the deliberate visual storytelling here. She is no longer scrubbing the floor in a blind panic. She is simply pouring a cup of tea. The sensory details remain the same. The freezing marble and the sprawling city 40 floors below are identical, but the world inside her head is completely transformed. Kyle drifts into the frame, exhausted from the day, and loosely rests his arm across her shoulders. She whispers that she could not sleep, and he presses a soft kiss into her hair. It is a quiet portrait of ordinary, breathtaking peace, unfolding in the exact room that used to paralyze her with fear. It leaves us with one final, beautiful lesson. True resilience is not just running from the darkness. It is having the courage to stand in the room that once terrified you, and finally feeling at home. This is ground zero, the exact room where tragedy first fractured her world. Kyle leans his weight against her, his voice a quiet anchor. No more ghosts in this house, he tells her. With that single vow, she pulls the iron gates shut on the demons that hunted her for years. Outside the glass, millions in Manhattan rush through the noise of survival. But stick with me for a second. Let us just watch these two, illuminated by the amber glow of a quiet kitchen. They dragged themselves through an inferno, and neither pretends The burns are gone. The scars are thick and permanent. Yet they step into the dawn armed with something unbreakable. The agency to write their own ending. It brings us to a simple realization. We can never scrub the brutal chapters from our history, but we do hold the power to choose whose hand holds ours when the smoke finally clears. It is a quiet relief to watch the fragile illusion of safety harden into concrete reality. The camera lingers, watching her set her cup in the sink before letting Kyle lead her down the hallway. Then, we get one final cutaway. Deep inside a federal prison, Adrian stares up at a rotting ceiling. His poisoned mind will never comprehend how two people can love each other without holding a blade to the other person's throat. But the lens loses interest in him. This triumph belongs completely to Sarafina. She chose to save her own soul first, making room for a partner who offered true respect. As the screen fades, it leaves us with a profound truth to carry with us. We do not need another person to magically glue our shattered pieces back together. We only need someone who looks closely at our jagged, broken edges and fiercely decides they are not going anywhere. A deeper lesson from the story comes when Adrian reveals that Sarafina had hidden part of her past, her emotional involvement with Marcus Chen. This does not erase Adrian's harmful behavior, but it complicates the story. Sarafina did suffer from control, fear, surveillance, and manipulation. At the same time, she also omitted details that changed how Kale understood the conflict. This teaches a very important educational lesson. Truth must be complete if trust is going to be strong. Pain can be real even when the victim is not perfect. A person can make mistakes and still be harmed. Leaving out important facts can damage the trust of people who are trying to help. Kale feels betrayed not only because Sarafina had a complicated past, but because he acted aggressively against Adrian without knowing the full picture. This part of the story is meaningful because it avoids a simplistic lesson where one person is simply pure and another is completely evil. Real life is often more complicated. People may be hurt and still make poor choices. People may be victims and still need to be honest about their own actions. Education should teach emotional responsibility alongside self-protection. Sarafina's affair or near affair does not justify Adrian's coercive control. No betrayal gives someone the right to stalk, monitor, intimidate, or not psychologically abuse another person. But honesty still matters. If Sarafina wants real protection and real trust, she must tell the whole truth, not only the part that makes her easiest to believe. The lesson for viewers is balanced. Do not use someone's mistakes to excuse abuse, but also do not build your healing on selective truth. Accountability and victimhood can exist in the same person. True growth begins when someone can say, "I was hurt, but I also need to be honest about what I did."